Hello readers by eyes and by ears, this is Mari Chan and welcome back to my channel. Today we are continuing with the reading of Remnants of Filth Volume 2, also known as Yu by Rou Bao, and we're covering a lot of ground today. I am trying to get done with this thing. Anyway, we are covering chapters 47 through 53. Yes, 7 chapters. Why? Because we can. It's Saturday and I've got plenty of reading time. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dig in. Enjoy! Chapter 47, Important Person. Things would have been fine if Jiang hadn't said anything. But as soon as he spoke up, Yue Chengqing turned furious, as if he'd been jabbed in a tender spot in his heart. "Ha! As if," he yelled. "My fourth uncle is super good to me. I'd revere him no matter how he treats me. It's not your place to comment." "That's not what I meant." Faced with the sight of Yue Chengqing fuming with anger, Jiang Yeshui found himself at a loss. Just what? If we hadn't bumped into you, fourth uncle wouldn't have left. He promised to teach me how to choose spirit stones today. This is your fault. You made him leave." Consumed by his animosity toward Jiang Yeshui, Yue Chengqing turned away with his arms crossed as soon as he finished yelling, unable to even look at him. Jiang Yeshui, clearly wounded by this treatment, summoned a forced smile and did his best to smooth things over. "You've already started to learn the grades of spirit stones?" "This is very difficult to master and requires careful guidance. If you want, I can..." Yue Chengqing pouted. "No, you can't. I don't want you teaching me at all. You're nothing compared to my fourth uncle." Jiang Yeshui fell silent and lowered his eyes. After a while, he said, "You're right. I can't really compare with Chu Yi." "My apologies," Jiang Yeshui replied quietly. Yue Chengqing wasn't a cruel person. His words were thoughtlessly blurted out of anger. After venting his emotions, he became somewhat calmer and, upon hearing the note of tearful despondence in Jiang Yeshui's voice, felt that he had probably spoken too harshly. He glanced furtively at Jiang Yeshui, but his eyes quickly darted away in distaste. At this strained moment, the shopkeeper returned from the inner room with 2 bottles of pine oil. The Yue clan were important customers for this general goods store, so he didn't even hand the oil to Jiang Yeshui before he rushed to greet Yue Chengqing with a greasy smile. "Oh, an honored guest, young Yue Gongzi. Come, please take a seat. Yue Manor's orders arrived quite a while ago. Please wait. I'll call someone to get them for you right away." This was the perfect excuse for Yue Chengqing to turn his back on Jiang Yeshui. He walked up to the counter, produced a sheet of paper from within his robes, and cleared his throat. "We need to add these items to the list, too. My papa and fourth uncle always need them, so deliver them with the rest, okay?" Alrighty. The shopkeeper loved it when customers added items at the last minute. He took the paper and perused it with a smile. Suddenly, his smile froze. Yue Chengqing was leaning comfortably over the counter, propped up on his elbows. "What is it? Are you out of stock again?" How come you're always out of stock?" Yue Chengqing asked, somewhat irked. "The fourth uncle thinks I'm useless whenever I can't get everything he asks for. He was pretty displeased last time, and if it's the same thing again, then he'll..." Yue Chengqing's hair stood on end at the very thought. He shuddered. "I'd better go to a different shop." The shopkeeper instantly grew anxious. No!" he cried. "Young Gongzi, you've misunderstood. A few of the items need to be checked over in inventory, that's all. Please take a seat. All the items you requested will be ready shortly." He turned and called behind him. "Adu, come here." The shop assistant diligently scurried forward. The shopkeeper pulled him into a back room and whispered something in his ear. By the time the shopkeeper emerged again, he had a warm and friendly smile on his face once more. "Young Yue Gongzi, please come with me to the rear courtyard to take a look at the goods. If you're satisfied with everything, I'll load the carriage and deliver it all to the manor as soon as possible." Yue Chengqing seized the opportunity to get away from Jiang Yeshui and followed the shopkeeper without another word. His silhouette disappeared behind the curtain. It would not be appropriate for Shee to comment on other people's family matters, so he said nothing. Jiang Yueshe cast his eyes down to the floor, his thin, frail frame cutting an unremarkable figure in the corner where he stood. He strove to appear unbothered, but the dejection and embarrassment on his face were not easily hidden. After the shopkeeper left with Yue Changqing, his assistant, Adu, emerged from the inner hall holding 2 bottles of oil. He handed them to Jiang Yueshe. Begging your pardon for the wait, Qingxu elder, here are 2 jugs of tung oil. Please take care. Jiang Yueshe blinked in surprise. What? The 2 jugs of tung oil that you requested. Take care. But I asked for pine oil. The expression of supposed shock on Adu's face was clumsy as it could be. Is that so? He stammered. He was probably unused to lying, and flushed red halfway through his sentence. The shopkeeper clearly said tung oil. Could I have misheard? Jiang Yueshe was still perplexed. Then I'll have to trouble you to exchange it. Adu winced. You want pine oil? Our pine oil is all sold out today. How about you come another... The assistant was interrupted by a deep, cold voice. How many times do you want him to make the trip on those legs of his? It was Shee, emerging from behind the other 2 men and leveling a harsh look at the assistant. Shee-ahgn. Shee's gaze was incisive as he asked in frigid tones. Was it that you misheard, or was it that Yuan Manor just so happened to need pine oil as well, so you sold it to them instead? The assistant didn't dare lie to Shee, so his face only flushed redder as he tried to stall. By this time, Jiang Yueshe had realized what was going on. He sighed softly and said to Shee, It doesn't matter. My shop isn't too far from here anyway. I'll yield to Chengqing so he doesn't have to run all over the place. It's too cold out, and coming here isn't easy for him. And I know Chuyi's temper. Goo Mahn's eyes flitted back and forth as he watched this conversation from the sidelines. He reached up to touch the slave collar on his neck, perhaps recalling that Jiang Yueshe was a kind person who had given him his necklace. He ducked out of the room and darted into the garden without warning. Before anyone could stop him, he had pulled Yue Changqing back into the shop. Yue Changqing's small face was bright red from being dragged in by Goo Mahng by the collar of his fur coat. What are you doing? He sputtered. You little turtle, let go of me. Goo Mahng didn't release Yue Changqing until he had hauled him all the way over to Jiang Yueshe. What are you doing? Yue Changqing whined, massaging his neck. Want pine oil, Goo Mahng parroted. You want pine oil? Goo Mahng pointed at the embarrassed Jiang Yueshe. He does. I don't. Yue Changqing couldn't help but look at Jiang Yueshe, but almost immediately tore his gaze away again. No, that's what my 4th uncle wants, he grumbled. Goo Mahng said, He was here first. Yue Changqing fell silent. Clients who come first are served first. The shopkeeper had also rushed back into the room and was rendered helpless upon witnessing the scene. He smiled sheepishly, unsure of what to say. Yue Changqing had finally gotten the gist of the situation. Being a reasonable person, he quickly turned to the shopkeeper, wide-eyed. Shopkeeper, surely you couldn't have promised to sell the pine oil to him, then gone back on your word because you didn't want me to leave? I didn't, the shopkeeper blurted out. I just misheard. Yue Changqing saw the shopkeeper panicking and saw what had happened clearly. And now you're lying about it, he cried in rage. You big bad dog! Jiang Yueshe didn't like to cause trouble. He shook his head. It's no problem. I'm not in a rush. Young Yue Gongzi, keep the oil. I'll be taking my leave. He leaned on his cane and lowered his head as he slowly made his way to the exit. After witnessing the man's repeated humiliations, Yue Changqing stood rooted on the spot for a long interval, wearing an expression of blank discontent. When Jiang Yueshe reached the door, his conscience could finally bear no more. He shouted, Hey! The instant Yue Changqing opened his mouth, he regretted it. Damn it! His papa, his uncle, and his 4th uncle all disliked this person. If they knew that Yue Changqing had spoken to him, they might skin him alive. But Jiang Yueshe had already stopped in his tracks. Yue Changqing had no choice but to brace himself and press on. Why do you want the pine oil? To make some talismans. Oh. Yue Chengqing cocked his head. His curiosity got the better of him, and he asked, hesitant, When Li Qingqian was causing trouble, was it you who gave the talismans of indestructibility to the poor? Jiang Yuexue said nothing. Embarrassed, Yue Chengqing shot him another glance. Finally, Jiang Yuexue sighed. It's cold out. You shouldn't be running all over the city. Get your shopping done and go home. Don't make your fourth uncle angry again. With that, he lifted the entrance curtain and walked out, leaving Yue Chengqing standing in a daze. Yue Chengqing caught Mo Xi's eye and mumbled, confused and hurt. Shihejun, These were the matters of the Yue clan. Mo Xi only shook his head in silence and followed Jiang Yuexue out of the shop. They accompanied Jiang Yuexue back to the forge. It was dusk when they parted ways. As they made their way home, Goo Mahng suddenly asked, Mo Xi, that Jiang Yuexue, why did he let White Bird have the oil? White Bird? The guy who called me a little turtle. With a start, Mo Xi realized that Goo Mahng was referring to Yue Chengqing, who had been wearing a thick white coat with a fur collar. Goo Mahng must have thought he looked like a white bird. He explained, because Jiang Yuexue is his dage. If you're a dage, you have to let other people take your things? Mo Xi was silent for a spell. No, those other two people were important to him, so he let them have their way. Just like that Shizun who let you eat roast goose? Mo Xi felt his heart thump. It took him a moment to respond. You think that Shizun thought I was important? Goo Mahng thought it over. Roast goose is tasty. He gave it to you. You are important. Mo Xi cast him a strange look and paused for a second before responding. Do you think the person who gave you the brocade pouch is important? Goo Mahng responded instantly. Yes. Mo Xi's face immediately darkened and he snapped. Maybe you think he's important, but who's to say he feels the same? I've sheltered you for this long, but I've yet to see anyone else in the capital show any concern for you. Goo Mahng hung his head and fell silent. Mo Xi had been hurt, so he retaliated by striking back at the person who had hurt him. You just made it up in your head. You're so easily satisfied by a single brocade pouch. If that person really thought you were important, he would come looking for you. You've been in jeopardy so many times. He should have come to your rescue. Did he? No. Goo Mahng replied dully. So he didn't. Yet you're still convinced he's important? He's important. Mo Xi looked at him for a moment. Then he sneered with a hint of resentment. Fascinating. Which honored hero is he? Why don't you introduce him to me? This time, Goo Mahng desolately shook his head. He lowered his lashes and didn't argue, looking somewhat wounded. The dispute had disheartened them both, so neither spoke as they walked along side by side. Only when they neared the city center did Mo Xi finally speak to Goo Mahng again. Put your head up. There are too many eyes and ears here. Goo Mahng obeyed. While they walked, Mo Xi still felt annoyance as he ruminated on Goo Mahng's words. He stopped to buy a cup of cold tea when they passed a tea stall and stepped aside to drink it. Gradually, the whispering that had surrounded them as they walked grew louder. Hiya! Look, it's Shihejun! My husband! Ah! No way! Clearly he's my husband! This was the imperial capital. Though the city teemed with glittering nobles and Mo Xi himself was no hermit, the maidens passing by still couldn't resist sneaking look after look as soon as they caught sight of him. Mo Xi was very fetching, his lips especially so. Although they were thin, their shape was sensual, and their color was the perfect hue to inspire in any bystander an involuntary urge to kiss them. Unfortunately, despite being born with such alluring, kissable lips, he had a gaze as cold as permafrost and looked at everyone with an expression of impatience, a perfect picture of asceticism. Nevertheless, he couldn't extinguish the maiden's covetous looks. On top of that, a certain idea had begun to spread throughout Chonghua at some point. Everyone said Shihejun seemed so coldly aloof and arrogant, But if you looked at his broad shoulders, slender waist, and long legs, and the ruthless dominance he exuded when his temper exploded, my, you could imagine the kind of all-consuming ecstasy he could fuck someone into. Take, for example, the crowd of beautiful ladies that had congregated on the second floor of a brothel on this street. Their clients only visited at night, so they lazed around during the day. Presently, they happened to be eating snacks and chatting on the balcony. Upon catching sight of Morsi, they descended into a flurry of whispers. I'm telling you, this man wouldn't be at all refined in bed. The brothel madam mused aloud as she spat melon seeds and waved a round gauze fan. The maidens surrounding her all burst into giggles. One girl piped up, Mother, you don't know what you're talking about. Jee-ahgn maintains abstinence and never goes to brothels. How would you know what he's like in bed? Hush. You all are too young. You haven't seen enough of the world. I may not be good at much, but I've got one hell of an eye for men. She pointed a sly finger at her girls and joked, If you ever got the opportunity to sleep with him, I'm afraid he'd take a few decades off your life. Considering this, those hedonistic girls laughed all the more merrily. Mother, I'd love nothing more than for him to wreck me. You say that now. The madam rolled her eyes, waving her fan toward Morsi's distant silhouette. Look at his legs, his shoulders, his back, his waist. Do you think he's anything like the weak and sickly Wang Shizun? If you really took him to bed, he'd fuck you until you couldn't catch enough breath to cry. That's still better than weaklings who finish in 2 strokes. The words grew more obscene as they continued. Their faces were lovely as flowers, and this juxtaposition with their coarse language created an indescribable sense of tragedy. They all knew that good men would not be sleeping in their beds. All the sincere and tender sentiments held in their hearts could only be offered to the old, the ugly, or the callous men who came to call. In the end, those men's wives would hate them, and the daughters of pristine families would disdain them. Even as they laughed, their words slowly faltered. One of the girls watching Morsi from afar let out a soft sigh. She said nothing more, and her sisters around her all gradually lapsed into silence. Among the handsome men of the world, those too open with their affections weren't tempting enough, and those too reserved weren't alluring enough. However, men like Morsi, who were clearly possessed of fiery tempers and passions, yet remained honorable and proper, cool and composed, were precisely the type that girls yearned for. But to whom did his heart belong? I really envy Princess Mengzi, a songstress murmured, hiding her mouth behind a fan. In all of Chonghua, who doesn't envy Princess Mengzi? Replied another girl. A good birthright is what it is. Forget everyone else who likes her. I hear Jee-ahgn will marry no other. He's just waiting for her health to improve, and then he'll take her as his wife. Hiya, it truly makes me jealous as hell. Hey, wait a second. Who else likes her? Tell us. All those noble young masters do. Jin Yunjun, Fang Yaojun, Wang Shizun. No way Wang Shizun does. He only loves himself. I heard that Goo Mahng used to like her too. That's nonsense for sure. Goo Mahng liked everyone and never stayed long with anyone. At the mention of those old stories about Goo Mahng, the women grew excited, and a vivaciously pretty girl spoke up. On that subject, Mother, I've heard it said that Goo Mahng was quite fond of you, back when you were with the army. The girls all started giggling again. Their madam used to be one of the top courtesans in Chonghua. Brash and stubborn, she had earned the nickname Hua Jiao, Little Peppercorn. At present, she was only in her early 30s, and her furious gaze was still quite piquant. Making fun of me again? Why bring me into it? She snapped. Come on, I'm just curious. Mother, why don't you teach us your tricks? That's right. If not for Mother's skills, General Goo wouldn't have been interested. The madam rolled her eyes. Goo Mahng, forget about him. He was a fickle lout who'd have a new girl on his arm every few days. Who wants to talk about him? She paused. If he hadn't fallen out with his imperial majesty and turned traitor, If he were still that glorious renowned General Goo, I bet he would have had his fun with each of you in turn. After a moment's thought, she added derisively, "What a playboy." None of these women knew that the playboy she spoke of was the hooded man standing obediently at Morsi's side. As Goo Mahng watched Morsi drink his third bowl of cold tea, he piped up, "Are you going to have more?" Morsi gave him a frigid look. "What do you want?" "It's night. Dinner time," said Goo Mahng. This man had become quite demanding. Morsi was still upset. "Go ask your honorable pouch giver." "I'm asking you," Goo Mahng insisted stubbornly. Morsi had finally reached his breaking point. He fumed. "Do you think I'm your slave, to be called forth and sent back as you please?" Unexpectedly, Goo Mahng pointed to himself. "I am the slave. You are the lord." Silence. "But you aren't my lord," Goo Mahng continued, some confusion appearing on his face. "Jiang Yueshe said the back of the collar had to be carved with your name, but you said it didn't. Why?" Morsi clenched his jaw. "Because I don't want you." Goo Mahng was dazed for a moment. He looked perplexed as he repeated, "You don't want me. No one else wants me either. No one wants Goo Mahng." "So nobody wants Goo Mahng?" "That's right," Morsi replied. He didn't understand. He was clearly the one saying hurtful and insulting things to Goo Mahng, yet the one who felt worse and worse was himself. He returned the teacup to the stall owner. "No one wants you. Let's go." "Where are we going?" "Aren't you hungry?" Morsi grumpily said. "I'm taking you out to eat." Chapter 48. The Truth Behind Flirtations. Chonghua had seen a sudden period of growth over the past few years. All sorts of restaurants, big and small, had popped up in the capital like bamboo shoots sprouting after the rain. However, the place Morsi brought Goo Mahng to was clearly an older establishment, the Soaring Swan. This restaurant had once been one of the finest in Chonghua's capital. In those days, only aristocrats could afford its shockingly high prices. But in recent years, the Soaring Swan's haughty attitude had softened, likely due to competition. This old swan had no choice but to mimic the nearby songbirds that offered good food at cheap prices. The menu was no longer so outlandishly expensive, and ordinary cultivators could afford to dine here. Despite these changes, the old swan's time was slowly but surely ticking away. It was the dinner rush right now, but the premises were desolate, with scant few carriages stopping outside. Morsi entered the restaurant with Goo Mahng, mindlessly trailing his every step. The owner, an obsequious, portly man with the surname Liu, rushed over at once. "Hiya, Shizun, long time no see. Here for dinner?" "A private room, please." "Of course. The old one?" Morsi paused. Proprietor Liu led them both to the second floor and to a private room at the end of the corridor. Its delicate entrance curtain was crafted of tortoiseshell bamboo, and a thick carpet embroidered with celestial bodies covered the floor. Morsi still remembered the first time he'd brought Goo Mahng to this room. After following Morsi through the door, Goo Mahng had been stunned speechless by the sumptuous trappings of luxury. He'd spent an age gathering himself, only to ask, face ashen, "Just to double check, Daga, are you paying? If not, I couldn't afford it even if you sold me." But like the restaurant's fame and glory, the carpet's once shimmering gold threads had been dulled by a layer of dust. Morsi flipped through the menu, but his thoughts were such a mess he couldn't focus on the words. In the end, he snapped the intricately embroidered menu shut and pushed it toward Goo Mahng. "You choose." Goo Mahng was still toying with the bronze plaque on his collar and started at the sound of Morsi's voice. "I can't read." "There are pictures. The scroll has been imbued with spiritual energy so you can see how the dishes look." So Goo Mahng opened the menu, holding it up as he perused it with care. "I want this one, this one, and this one." He alternated between jabbing periodically at the menu and biting down on his finger in a daze. "So hungry." Morsi was silent. He had turned his face away and was no longer looking at Goo Mahng. When Goo Mahng noticed this, he asked, "Are you still mad?" "No." Goo Mahng thought for a moment. and then said, "Don't be mad. You're also important." Morsi's heart pounded, but his expression was impassive as he replied coolly, "Why bother flattering me? I don't have a brocade pouch for you." Goo Mahng smiled. "But you gave me a necklace." Silence. If the emotion in Morsi's eyes had been jealousy, most of it had faded instantly at these words, darkening into sorrow. He glanced at the pitch-black slave collar on Goo Mahn's neck and could not find the words or energy to reply. In the end, every twist of fate in his life had been tied to Goo Mahng. Without Goo Mahng of yesteryear, the Morsi of the present wouldn't exist. If he cast aside the hatred of two warring nations, what could he hate Goo Mahng for? When his family was tearing itself apart, it was Goo Mahng who held out his hand to him. When he had no reputation to speak of, it was Goo Mahng who kept him company. When he had been at his wit's end, it was Goo Mahng who encouraged him with a smile. He owed him a debt of grace. "Don't worry. Everything will be all right. How bad could it be? Even if your uncle screwed you over, you're still a noble. Look at me. I'm a slave, and I'm not even worrying, so why are you? If there comes a day when your uncle really leaves you without a place to go, I'll give you half my room to live in and half my food to eat, okay? You still have me." How much had Goo Mahng done for him? Back when Morsi's future had been uncertain, when he was being bullied in the military, Goo Mahng had been the only person who cared about his feelings or whether he'd eaten his fill. Morsi was aloof and stubborn, and his aristocratic young masters he lived with all looked down on him. He had lost his father young, and his mother had remarried despite the scandal it sparked. If she had another child, Morsi's circumstances would become even worse. Those other nobles would sometimes toss Morsi's rations to the ground. Goo Mahng, who couldn't bear to see this floundering young master bullied, always set aside some of his own food for Morsi. But the rations slave cultivators received were quite unappetizing, and though Morsi never complained, Goo Mahng could tell that Morsi merely endured them. Thus, Goo Mahng came up with a plan. Every few days, he'd beg cash from his buddies, tell them he needed to buy makeup and accessories for a girl. Then, he'd quietly buy his Shudi a few treats to cheer the poor thing up. At the time, everyone in the troop said Goo Mahng was too fickle, and his buddies heckled him for his unfaithfulness. 2 days ago, he wanted to buy a jade pin for Xiaolan. Today, he's looking for money again, saying he wants to buy a flower pin for Xiao Die. Ha! This skirt-chasing scoundrel! Lu Jianxin, Goo Mahn's best friend back then, had asked, Mang, what happened to you? You never used to be so extravagant. Did you go wild after joining the army?" Goo Mahng responded by shamelessly sticking out his hand. "Bro, could you spare me some coin? I'll do your laundry for a month." "Who's caught your eye now?" Lu Jianxing exclaimed. Goo Mahng made up a name on the spot. "Old Wang's daughter from the next village over." Lu Jianxing stared. "She's only 6! You're insane!" No one knew the truth. No one knew that the deranged spendthrift skirt chaser Goo Mahng was using the excuse of visiting brothels to slip away to the closest city and wash dishes for a run-down restaurant. He'd disguise himself with a spell and change his clothes so no one could tell he was an officer from the garrison troops. He washed mountains of soup and rice bowls with such enthusiasm that even the proprietors stared in admiration. "Young man, why don't you come work here full-time? I'll keep paying you this much." Even under his disguise, Goo Mahng's eyes were still bright as the stars on a summer's night. "Thank you, sir, but I can't abandon my other responsibilities." "Oh, that's a pity." The proprietor patted him on the head. "It's rare to see such a hard-working youth." Morsi's Gu Shishong suffered in secret and exhausted himself in silence, all to take care of him. And Morsi had no clue what he did, not until he saw his comrade's blood-stained letter and realized he was in love with the man 3 years his senior. At that time, Morsi had charged through the snow, seized by an irrepressible need to find Goo Mahng and confess his feelings. However, when he arrived, Lu Jianxing was the only one in the tent. "Goo Mahng? They dragged him out to the brothel in the city." Lu Jianxing had told him. "You know what they say, youth isn't meant for abstinence." In that instant, Morsi felt as if he'd been dealt a sharp blow. He struggled to rescue his calm, but failed to control his feelings. He leapt onto a horse and sped to the brothel Lu Jiangxing had named, but only found a few of Goo Mahng's friends there. Goo Mahng himself was nowhere in sight. His chest burned with an unstoppable fire. Refusing to give up, he searched every shop in the nearby village, going through them one by one. At last, he found the alleged brothel-goer Goo Mahng in the kitchen of a little restaurant. Goo Mahng was cloaked in an illusion spell, so Morsi shouldn't have been able to identify him. But he kept careful watch, and when Goo Mahng looked up from the washing basin, Morsi caught his eye. In that single glance, Morsi recognized his Goo Shige. Morsi's heart, which had ricocheted between the disappointment of hearing Goo Mahng went to a brothel to the shock of seeing Goo Mahng elbows deep in a pile of dishes, was devastated. Suddenly, he had no idea how to confess his feelings. His chest roiled with passion, and even the gaze he directed at Goo Mahng was scorching. But impulses start off potent, and wane as time passes and consideration sets in. When Morsi had first thought to confess, he didn't find Goo Mahng in the tent. When he angrily rushed to the brothel, intent on dragging him out, he again didn't find Goo Mahng. Now that he had finally found him, that uncontrollable fervor was no longer so urgent. He caught his breath in the wind-blown snow, then strode to the lattice door and flung it open, sending the chicks in the courtyard into a frenzy with the commotion. He walked straight toward the bewildered Goo Mahng. He saw Goo Mahng's hands submerged in the water. If he wished to avoid exposing himself as a cultivator, Goo Mahng couldn't use magic, and it was a cold winter. His fingers were red and swollen. Morsi felt a sudden lump in his throat. When he thought about his own status at the time, he didn't know what right he had to speak those words of confession, what right he had to ask even more of Goo Mahng. He yanked Goo Mahng off the little stool without a word. Lowering his long lashes, he cupped Goo Mahng's freezing hands in his own. He held his Shige's hands and rubbed them between his palms. "Does it hurt?" he murmured. But Goo Mahng grinned and shrugged it off. "What's a little frostbite? That's nothing. Men look better a little rough around the edges." Goo Mahng scratched his head with hands swollen as radishes, the tip of a sharp canine showing in his grin. "Your Goo Mahng Guga is the handsomest." It was a ridiculous sentiment. No one would find a pair of hands like frozen radishes handsome. But what did Goo Mahng care? What he meant was, "Since you're in the army, in the same troop as me, and you're my shirdi, I can't let you be wronged." It wasn't as if Morsi had never tried to dissuade Goo Mahng. He told Goo Mahng that he was being too generous and that Morsi's future was uncertain. This grace might not be something he could repay. But army ruffian Goo Shishong only laughed, his long lashes frosted over in the cold night. "Who said anything about repayment? You're in my squadron and you're my brother, so I need to protect you. But I... Enough with the buts. If it really bothers you, make note of everything you owe me in a scroll, and return it all with interest once you've made your mark." Goo Mahng ruffled Morsi's hair with a smile. "Hey-yo, my precious princess is such a finicky little fool." Morsi watched that youthful and lively grin widen in the glow of the light. Right then and there, he secretly decided he would repay Goo Mahng with the best of everything he had, and more. He would seek out the rarest treasures and the most splendid finery and give them all to him. He wanted to take care of this man for a lifetime. But what happened in the end? Goo Mahng had given Morsi salvation, and Morsi repaid him with that pitch-black lock around his neck. And the last bit of irony to top it all off, this was the best he could give Goo Mahng. After experiencing the kind of betrayal and hatred he had, after his heart had frozen like cold steel, this was the last thing he could give him. So, this was the lifetime they'd share. The dishes had been ordered. Morsi continued to sit silently, arms crossed as his mind wandered. "You're still unhappy," Goo Mahng said. Morsi glanced at him. "I swear I'm not." Goo Mahng persisted. "Why are you unhappy?" Silence. "Is it because you don't like it here? We can go somewhere else." Morsi sighed, extricating himself from his memories. "Why would we go somewhere else? The food here is really good. You used to have a few favorite dishes, but I don't know if you ordered them." "My favorites? From before?" Goo Mahng murmured. "Like I said, we used to know each other." Goo Mahng thought this over as best he could before giving up. "Sure, if you say so." This restaurant had many Shu-style dishes, but Goo Mahng was no stranger to chokingly spicy food. Western Shu was one of Chonghua's allies, and Goo Mahng had once traveled there to assist their military when war ravaged the country. Footnote number 8, Western Shu is modern-day Sichuan province. Returning to the reading. Before then, he'd been someone who couldn't bear the tiniest hint of spice, but that trip had transformed him into someone who could down a full plate of chili pepper chicken doused in red oil without the slightest change in expression. But could was not the same as would. Morsi knew Goo Mahng still preferred local cuisine. In those years when Goo Mahng had defected to the Liao kingdom, Morsi wondered if he ever saw the grape wines on the table that missed the steam buns and meat pies of his homeland, whether he ever regretted it, if only just a little. In contrast with Chonghua's typically mild fare, everything about this restaurant was intense. The kitchen was in plain sight, separated from the dining area by a cloth curtain. The guests on the lower floor could hear the furious sizzle of oil and crisp sounds of spatulas striking pans. From time to time, gouts of flame would flare up from the woks, casting a crimson glow over the entire kitchen. The waiter brought over a dish in each hand and another balanced on his head. Yuxiang eggplant, cold-tossed chicken, a basket of guokui flatbreads. Gentlemen, please enjoy your meal while it's hot. It won't taste as good cold. Footnote number 9 for Yuxiang. It literally means fish fragrant. Seasoning contains no fish despite its name. It typically includes fermented spicy bean paste, garlic, ginger, soy sauce, black vinegar, sugar, salt, and chili peppers. Returning to the reading. That sounds really delicious, by the way. Goo Mahng reached out and silently lifted the bamboo basket from the server's head. The flatbreads were kneaded with lard and filled with meat. The dough was stuffed with minced pork, ground peppercorns, and glistening tender green onions. The pancakes were brushed on both sides with lard and baked in a furnace. Even from within the basket, they gave off a delicious aroma of char. Goo Mahng wasn't fond of green onion, but after he had removed all the offending pieces, he found the pancake very much to his liking, carefully clasping it in his hands as he took bite after bite. The rest of the dishes arrived one by one. The glossy, twice-cooked pork trembled delicately and shimmered between their chopsticks. The tender hearts of the boiled cabbage were soaked in rich chicken broth, leaving behind a refreshing, lingering sweetness. The stir-fried pork kidneys had been scored such that the slices of meat curled charmingly when seared over high heat with garlic shoots. The scent of the kitchen's smoky blaze still wreathed the dishes when it was brought out, the texture both tender and crisp. The flavors of these dishes were simple yet fierce. A single bite was enough to clear one's head. The numbing spice of the peppercorns made the nose and tongue tingle. None of the dishes on this table used costly ingredients, but they were still incredibly delicious. The expense of them was in the exquisite skill of the cooks, which had been the reason for this restaurant's exorbitantly high prices in the past. Yum, Goo Mahng said, and then mumbled to himself. It feels like I've eaten it before. At this, Morsi's already lukewarm appetite cooled yet further. He set down his chopsticks and turned to look out the window at the streets and paths below. Goo Mahng licked his lips. What's wrong, princess? It took a moment for Morsi to register those words. His head snapped. What did you call me? Chapter 49. Hate You. Morsi's abrupt change in expression frightened Goo Mahng. He hesitated before answering. Princess? Morsi felt like all the blood in his body had rushed to his head. This single word was like a boulder crashing into the ocean, making his head ring so thunderously that it took him a moment to speak again. Why did I what? Morsi's fingertips felt cold. He desperately grabbed the teacup on the table, which barely concealed his trembling as he asked hoarsely, Why did you call me that? Oh, it's what Li Wei taught me. He said princess means someone very respected and high up, someone who should be properly cared for. Goo Mahng smiled. I think you're just like that. A long silence ensued. What's wrong? Goo Mahng asked. It was like Morsi had fallen off the edge of a cliff to the bottom of a gorge. His trembling continued, but his excitement instantly cooled. He gritted his teeth and turned away. Nothing. Seconds went by, and still Goo Mahng looked perplexed. Morsi closed his eyes and finally managed to scrape away the anguish hidden in his heart. He raspily changed the subject. Drink your cabbage soup. Don't worry about me. Goo Mahng peered at the boiled napa cabbage in his bowl. But the soup is gone. Morsi made no reply. Goo Mahng's gaze flitted around the table and landed on the bowl of peppercorn meatball soup in front of Morsi. You want to try mine? Morsi asked. Goo Mahng nodded. Morsi was in a mood, but it was a complex one. He really didn't want to get angry. He pushed the soup bowl toward Goo Mahng. There are whole peppercorns in there. They have a very strong flavor. Be careful. Goo Mahng took the bowl and tore his last flatbread into pieces, dipping them into the bowl to eat. He blew on the soup and used a spoon to carefully avoid the curled-up peppercorn husks, but inevitably, one slipped through his defenses and trespassed into his mouth. He didn't react at first, and even crunched the shell between his teeth. The consequences were just as expected. An instant later, Goo Mahng spat out the peppercorn shell, tearing up, his tongue red and stinging from the numbing spice. He shoved the bowl of soup away. It's poisonous! Morsi was taken aback at first. Wasn't Goo Mahng able to handle spicy food? But he quickly realized that Goo Mahng had developed his spice tolerance later in life. Before, he wouldn't touch any food with the slightest hint of red. When the Liao Kingdom broke his mind, they'd probably reset all his acquired tolerances as well. This realization made Morsi's anxiety worse. Even now, he still harbored a sliver of hope that all of Goo Mahng's bewilderment was feigned. But in all the days they'd spent together, Goo Mahng's every move told him otherwise. The former beast of the altar had died. All Morsi could have, or hate, or lash out at was the handful of embers before him. Morsi watched him in exasperation. There's no poison. Goo Mahng stuck out his tongue, chagrin written all over his face. I've been poisoned. There was no point in trying to explain, so Morsi poured him a cup of cold jasmine. If you drink this slowly, it'll cure the poison. Goo Mahng apprehensively accepted the cup of tea and sipped it with a frown. Better now? Goo Mahng nodded and looked hesitantly at the table laden with food. I'm not eating anymore. Just don't eat the dishes that are poisoned. Goo Mahng pouted. This place is no good. Let's not come back. Morsi looked at Goo Mahng's lips bright red from the spice. An indescribable impulse surged in his heart. Goo Mahng, he said abruptly. This was where I treated someone to a meal for the first time. Do you know who that person was? Goo Mahng thought it over. Me? Morsi's eyes brightened for a moment, but then he saw the confusion in Goo Mahng's eyes and heard the question in his tone. Did I guess right? Morsi said no more. He silently closed his eyes and let out a soft sigh, leaving the question unanswered. In the evening, after they finished their meal, these two old friends turned enemies strolled along the shore of Yanzhi Lake. Red lanterns hung over the bridge, casting a rosy glow as gentle as a dream over the water's surface. Both slid past to anchor for the night. With the strike of a wooden oar, the dream shattered into glimmering fragments of light. Goo Mahng walked by Morsi's side. Morsi had bought him a steamed bun filled with chicken, pork, and bamboo shoots, a local specialty, and Goo Mahng was tearing through it with gusto. Morsi stopped walking and stared at the surface of the water. After a long while, as though still clutching at that last kernel of hope, but also as though mumbling without a care, he said, "If Lu Jiangxing hadn't died, would you still have gone to such lengths?" "What lengths?" Morsi watched the reflections in the water. "It's nothing. It's fine, even if you've forgotten it all. As long as you're alive, there's still a chance things will change." Why, The madam at Luomei Pavilion told me I could say to agree with other people. If I agree, people will be happy. Why bother trying to make me happy? Morsi asked after a pause. Goo Mahng took another bite of his bun. Because you're a good person. Morsi stared at him in shock, then coldly retorted, "You really don't know how to read people." Goo Mahng swallowed, his eyes pure and guileless as he gazed at Morsi, who stood amid the glowing lanterns and splashing oars. A pause. "Could you not do that, especially with something like this?" Forget it. After a beat, Morsi turned back to face Goo Mahng, thoroughly vexed. "How am I good?" "Hold on." As Goo Mahng spoke, he stepped closer to Morsi, sniffing like a puppy at his face, neck, and ears. If Morsi's female admirers could have seen this, they would no doubt have been stupefied. The cold and aloof Shizun actually letting someone get this close and act in a manner so strange and intimate? Didn't he usually throw people onto their backs and break their ribs? But they only knew part of the story. Morsi certainly didn't like being touched by strangers, but Goo Mahng was clearly an exception. Part of it was because he was now so naive now. Everything he did was born of a childlike instinct, with no other motivations. If he was curious about something, he would put it in his mouth for a taste. If he wanted to understand something, he would move closer for a sniff. But the other reason was that Morsi and Goo Mahng had been inseparable since long, long ago. He had long grown used to him. "There's a kind of smell on you," Goo Mahng said finally, "different from other people." "What smell?" Morsi looked at him. Goo Mahng shook his head. "I don't know, but..." He paused as if trying and failing to dredge an appropriate description from his sorry brain. "Very sweet. You smell like a spoonful of honey." It was clear that Morsi didn't want to continue this bizarre conversation. "What else?" he asked. Goo Mahng held out the remaining half of the bun. "Only you would buy me this." He looked at Morsi, puzzled. "Why do you care so much?" Morsi blinked, slightly startled. Was that written so vividly on his face? In the light of the lanterns reflected on the water, Goo Mahng looked at him with those large, elegant eyes, ever so calm and peaceful. Morsi shook his head and didn't answer the question. He only said, "You're the second person on earth to say I'm good." "Who's the first?" Morsi gazed at him. "Also you." Goo Mahng was stunned. There's two of me?" Oh, sorry. A pause. "That's not what I meant. Forget it. Telling you is a waste of time anyway." Goo Mahng's shock dissipated. "Then you should go ask some other people. Many of them will also tell you you're good." There was no one else he could ask. It had been a long time since he had allowed himself to speak his mind to someone else, or allowed anyone to share their innermost thoughts with him. Every person who had tried to get close to him had been pushed away by his icy detachment and bone-chilling coldness. Morsi thought of himself in his youth, of Goo Mahng washing dishes in that little restaurant, of the late emperor, of Mangzi. He thought of those bygone battle fires at Dongting Lake, and of kneeling in front of Goo Mahng like a beggar, pleading with him to turn back. The old scar on his chest started to ache dully. Those who had betrayed him and those he had betrayed all seemed to be washed away in the limpid waters of Yanzhi Lake. He closed his eyes. For some reason, His heart throbbed bitterly. When he spoke again, even he was frightened by the hoarseness of his voice. Goo Mahng, did you know? There are actually many secrets between us that I've never told anyone else. He fell silent. He hadn't done this kind of thing in almost 10 years. The words lodged in his throat, unable to pass the barrier of his teeth. Slowly, the impulse faded. He was like a vengeful ghost punished by having his tongue torn out. He could only swallow his bitterness back into his gut. He'd already grown used to it. At this point, Goo Mahng suddenly spoke. Don't say it. I'm not listening. Mo-si looked up. Why? Goo Mahng brushed away strands of stray hair that the night wind had blown into his eyes. He leaned against one of the bridge's wooden pillars and looked up at Mo-si. Because you don't really want to tell me. If I really knew you, then I might remember it myself in the future. So there's no point. He covered his ears. I'm not listening. Mo-si looked at Goo Mahng, standing there with his hands clapped over his ears. After a beat of silence, he broke into laughter. It was his first true laugh in a long time, one that was genuine rather than scornful, taunting, perfunctory, or insincere. Mo-si laughed long and hard, his back pressed to a wooden pillar. As Goo Mahng watched him, he slowly pulled his hands away from his ears and then raised them, this time to touch Mo-si's face. His fingers were cold. For this, Mo-si ought to have sharply rebuked him and pulled away. But against the backdrop of glowing lanterns and softly splashing oars, amid this anguish that had tormented him all day, or perhaps not just today, but ever since Goo Mangh's defection, his lashes fluttered slightly, but he couldn't say anything harsh. Wetness gathered at the corners of his eyes. Princess, Goo Mahng murmured, and then said inexplicably, Can I have your name on the back of my plaque? Because I seem to be a good person? He didn't expect Goo Mahng to shake his head. No, he said, because I think I really did know you. Mo-si felt like sharp talons had wrapped around his heart. Even breathing hurt. Goo Mahng said, I don't know what a lord is, but it sounds okay. I want it to be you. Mo-si stared at him, his feelings impossible to describe. His heart was filled with a melange of emotions, piquant and volatile. He summoned all his restraint to say, quiet and slow, You're far from worthy. What does worthy mean? Mo-si tried another track. What I mean is, you can't. Goo Mahng thought it over. Then what do I do to become worthy? Mo-si couldn't respond. He stared at Goo Mahng and only asked, Can't you tell that I hate you? What's hate? Goo Mahng asked, lost. Look into my eyes. I hate that I can't drink your blood, tear off your skin, and torture you to the brink of death with my own hands, make you suffer until you beg for death. Mo-si stared at him coldly as he enunciated each word. That's hate. Goo Mahng stared hard into his eyes. They were very close, their eyes fixed on one another's, their breaths mingling. Mo-si found it inappropriate and was about to push him away when he heard Goo Mahng say, But you look like you're in pain, like it really hurts. Hating me, it hurts you? Chapter 50. Accompany me. The speaker of those words did not take them to heart, but the listener did. Mo-si shut his eyes. He felt as if a phantom knife had pierced his vitals, filling his chest with blood that splattered across the ground. Since Goo Mahng had returned to Chonghua, he had only seen people with hateful, furious, and cruel expressions on their faces. He'd never seen anyone look at him the way Mo-si did. I'm sorry, he blurted. I won't ask you to be my lord anymore. Don't be sad. Mo-si said nothing. Don't hate me. If you stop hating me, will you stop hurting? Delicate lines rippled over the lake's surface. The shattered motes of reflected light like a sky full of flickering stars. Too late, Mo-si rasped, seemingly an age later. Goo Mahng, one day, you will die a justified death by my hand. I've sworn it. He turned around, his handsome features hazy and indistinct beneath the unsteady light of the red lanterns. I was never a good person. It's just that Shushong forgot. At this, Goo Mahng immediately swallowed the rest of his bun and began patting himself down. Confused, Morsi asked, "What are you doing?" After Goo Mahng had run his hands all over his clothes, he raised his head to say, "It's dry." He then reached for Morsi's hands, wanting him to feel it for himself. Of course, Morsi refused and shook off his grasp. He asked with a frown, "What do you think you're doing?" Huh? My chest isn't wet at all. So why did you call me Shushong?" Footnote number 10, Shushong, or wet chest, sounds like Shushong, senior marshal brother. Returning to the reading. Morsi blinked, dumbfounded. In any case, Morsi meant what he said. He had never been perfectly good. Far from it. He had rash ambition and reckless impulses, and had gone through phases of reserve as well as abandon. Goo Mahng had personally witnessed it all, and forgiven it. But this present Goo Mahng had buried their past. Morsi was the one standing in this besieged city, all alone, filled with resentment because he couldn't tear himself free. As they walked home that day, Morsi told Goo Mahng, "I've committed many wrongs." But when Goo Mahng asked him what they were, he fell silent. He used to love Goo Mahng, so he had always refrained from doing anything that would disappoint him. Up to the day Goo Mahng had admitted to his face that he'd turned traitor, Morsi hadn't actually hated him. And he hadn't truly committed many misdeeds, as he claimed. When it came to Goo Mahng, there was only one thing that he truly considered a mistake, and that was falling in love with him. That was an unforgivable crime that he had still chosen to commit over and over again. He was like an idiot beyond saving, angrily reminding himself he could never again make the same mistake while continuing to hang himself again and again on the same tree. That night, Morsi lay in bed, staring dry-eyed at the swirling patterns on his curtains and thinking, why not just kill Goo Mahng in a single strike? Why not make a clean cut and be done with it? What was he pushing himself like this for? It was only later that he realized he hoped Goo Mahng would remember the past. Not just so Goo Mahng could answer for his betrayal, and not just so Morsi could hear Goo Mahng repent or see Goo Mahng shed tears. He still wanted Goo Mahng to come and ask him about some of the secrets only known to the two of them. Even if Goo Mahng ranted and raved at him, even if they had to spill one another's blood and fight to the death once more, it would be at least better than the state of things now, where Morsi alone had to shoulder the memories of two. Goo Mahng. A sigh so soft it was barely audible drifted from beneath the bed's canopy. In the end, you're the heartless one. And so time passed just like this. Morsi was constantly on guard, but he never found any sign that Goo Mahng was faking his condition, and his hopes gradually faded. As he began to give up, his irritation with Goo Mahng grew. The kiss-up Liwei observed. Before, whenever Goo Mahng showed up, the Lord's eyes would be locked right on him. But now, whenever Goo Mahng shows up, the Lord turns away first. He concluded, the Lord is frustrated indeed. Liwei hardly needed to say it. All of Shihun Manor could feel Morsi's frustration. It was said that repression made people go crazy. Morsi's anger had been repressed for a long time, and the criticisms he heaped on Goo Mahng gradually grew crazier. Why must you eat with your hands? Has no one ever taught you to use chopsticks? If you don't know how to wash your clothes, then how do you know how to put them on? Liwei's taught you how to make lotus root porridge 3 times, yet you still can't tell the difference between the salt and the sugar jars. Are you blind, or is your tongue broken? The miscellaneous chores thrown at Goo Mahng grew more and more numerous, while the standards demanded became higher and higher. The more hopeless Morsi felt about Goo Mahng recovering his memories, the more impatient he became. By the end, even Morsi's personal servants found it outrageous. Even though the Lord's always walking around like a thundercloud, he wouldn't go off on us for no reason, and he'd never make things harder for us on purpose. But when it comes to Goo Mahng, looks like Goo Mahng really pissed him off. Some days later, Morsi's personal servants found themselves completely idle. This was not because of anything they had said or done, but because that twisted Shee had already assigned every last one of their duties to Goo Mahng. One had to admit that Goo Mahng was very clever. Although his mind had been damaged, his capabilities remained intact. After a month, he was able to properly and neatly handle all the chores that Li Wei had taught him. On top of that, he was physically strong and a fast worker, and didn't complain when he was assigned the work of 10. He never even whined about being tired. When the servants gathered, they gossiped about him non-stop. Look at the damned life he's living. He has to wake up at midnight to chop the firewood and light the cooking fires and make breakfast before dawn. Once the Lord wakes, he has to tidy up the room, and no matter how well he cleans, he suffers a round of scolding afterward. After that, he eats breakfast, only to be yelled at again while he eats. Then, when the Lord goes to court, he has to wash the clothes and hang them up to dry, then scrub the floors in the main hall, the reception pavilion, and the dining hall until they shine, then feed the fish and weed the back garden, and then prepare dinner. Huh, my God, I wonder how he feels. How did he feel? No one would believe it if he said so, but Goo Mahng didn't actually feel a damn thing. His vocabulary was so pitiful that when Morsi shouted at him, he could only understand simple phrases like, "Are you a pig?" On top of that, his obliviousness to social mores meant he didn't realize there was anything to be upset about. Because of his beastly nature, he considered things as an animal would. Even though Morsi always looked mean when he talked to him, and spoke quickly and impatiently whenever he started ranting, Goo Mahng didn't dislike him. After all, Morsi gave him good food every day. In Goo Manh's eyes, Shizun Manor was like a wolf pack's territory. Morsi was very strong. Every day, he would venture out to earn his official's salary. This official's salary could be exchanged for food, items, and clothing. So Goo Mahng felt that Morsi was a wolf with excellent hunting skills who was just a bit too fond of howling. However, since he was so capable, Goo Mahng decided not to look down on him for it. Roles and duties were very clear-cut within the wolf pack. If Morsi needed to go out and hunt, and he told Goo Mahng to stay within the territory to patrol, clean up, and do the washing, well, that was reasonable. Cooking was a rather complicated task, and he needed 10 or so days to learn all the words on the labels of those bottles and jars. But he was still quite pleased with himself. Now, not only did he know how to write the words sugar and salt, but also rice, flour, and oil. Goo Mahng felt that these were amazing accomplishments, and it was all thanks to Morsi's howling. As for vinegar and soy sauce, those words were too hard. He didn't know them, and he had no plans to learn. The scent of vinegar was so strong he wrinkled his nose as soon as he smelled it. He knew he would never mistake it for anything else in this lifetime. Every day, he and Morsi shared the spoils of Morsi's hunts. Gradually, Goo Mahng came to think of Morsi as a companion, and every time Morsi cursed and shouted at him, he felt inwardly anxious, though he didn't say anything. He knew that irritable wolves were more likely to fall into traps, and besides, if they got too angry, their fur would fall out. If they lost too much fur, they would easily fall sick, and if they got sick, they would easily die. He didn't want Morsi to die, because Morsi was the only person in Chonghua willing to share his prey with him. There were many times when he wanted to comfort Morsi so he would be less angry, but he went round and round Morsi without figuring out a way to calm him. In the end, all he could do was stand off to the side, listening as Morsi cursed him out while praying for Morsi's longevity. Only like this would he have food to eat. Such were Goo Manh's thoughts. Fortunately, Morsi had no idea, or his rage would have sent him to an early grave. It was nearing the end of the year, and the Bureau of Military Affairs was busy, so Morsi returned home late many days in a row. One particular night, he returned from a dinner party so late even Li Wei had already retired. He'd had a bit to drink at the party, but he had always been self-disciplined and drank only out of courtesy, not for pleasure. He certainly never indulged to the point of drunkenness. His chest was just rather warm, causing some minor discomfort. As he came to the courtyard that held his own quarters, he spied Goo Mahng squatting by the lotus pond, bathing the big black dog with his sleeves rolled up. When the black dog caught sight of Morsi, it struggled free of Goo Mahng's grip and immediately ran off. Goo Mahng got to his feet, water dripping from his arms. "Are you a pig?" Morsi snapped with his usual impatience. The black dog had splashed Goo Mahng with water, compelling him to wipe a hand down his face. Morsi caught sight of that hand, fingers bright red from the cold, and suddenly thought of the old Goo Mahng, who had lied to everyone and snuck out to earn money washing dishes just to spoil him. Something seemed to have lodged in his throat. Only after a long interval did he manage to say, "Are you a pig? Why can't you fetch firewood and heat up some water to wash him with?" "Fandou doesn't like heat." "Who?" Goo Mahng used his sleeve to wipe away another trickling stream of water. "Fandou." Morsi realized he was talking about the black dog that had been inseparable from him since Loa May Pavilion and was rendered momentarily mute. Goo Mahng always put the care and comfort of others above himself, often to his own detriment. Now, all he had was this dog brother, so he cared for the dog's feelings the same way he had cared for people. In the chill night air, Morsi studied Goo Mahng's face, taking in the way the bright moonlight illuminated his clean features, his pure expression, and his tranquil blue eyes. He wanted to say, "Why are you doing this to yourself?" But when his lips moved, the sneering words that emerged were, "Aren't you a saint?" He went inside to bathe and wash up, then climbed into the bed with his robes fastened. But he tossed and turned, incapable of sleep. Lately, he felt like he was becoming increasingly unhinged. Without an answer from Goo Mahng, he was like an unexorcised, vengeful ghost, driving himself madder and madder. Sometimes, he even thought it would be better if Goo Mahng died, or if he himself did. It would be better than this incessant guessing, this tumultuous torment. After midnight, it started to snow. Morsi stared into the dark through dry eyes. Suddenly, an impulse seized him. He flung the canopy aside and rushed outdoors without bothering to put on his shoes, his feet landing on the soft snow, gleaming white as willow fuzz. "Goo Mahng!" He yelled into the cave-like entrance within the pile of Taihu stones, thinking to himself that perhaps it was high time he got checked out by a doctor. "Goo Mahng, you'd better come out." The entrance curtain rustled, and Goo Mahng emerged, confused and half awake. He rubbed at his eyes. "What's wrong?" Morsi ground his teeth for a long time before answering stiffly. "Nothing." After a pause, he spat out. "But I don't want to be the only one awake." Any normal person would surely blench with fright and shriek, horrified. "You must be crazy." But Goo Mahng was clearly not a normal person. He only stood there, his eyes sleepy and unfocused, and calmly said, "Oh." That exhalation was as calm as the water in an old well. Since an utterance wouldn't have elicited the slightest ripple of emotion from a normal person, but Goo Mahng clearly wasn't normal either. The water fell into roiling oil and sparks instantly filled the sky. Rage surged within Morsi. He was barefoot in the icy night, clad in a thin robe, but he felt not a hint of chill. Instead, he felt violently hot. He stared at Goo Mahng, fiery sparks filling his eyes. Then he grabbed the man's arm so tightly red marks instantly appeared on Goo Mahng's wrist. He yanked him close and glared into his face. "I'm in a bad mood. Haven't you lost your wits now? Haven't you lost all your dignity, all your understanding of shame, all your memories? Don't you submit meekly to everything?" He watched those bewildered, drowsy eyes in the snowy night. In those blue eyes, he saw his own face, driven mad by suppressing himself for days on end. He realized he was being quite ridiculous. He swallowed thickly in an attempt to contain the defiant fury within him. But his breaths were still scalding, scorchingly hot. "Very well." He tightened his grip on Goo Mahng's arm and stared down at him. "You'll keep me company tonight." Chapter 51. Don't Move. Sparks flew from the charcoal brazier, and the pale blue bed canopy hung open. Morsi sat on the edge of the bed, staring at Goo Mahng with dark eyes. Get on your knees. Goo Mahng had learned how to kneel at Luomei Pavilion long ago, but he didn't like doing it. It wasn't because of pride, but because he didn't know what those people telling him to kneel wanted from him. He got on his knees, as he was told every time, but for some reason, the spite on their faces never faded. Rather, they only flushed redder with rage. He didn't know what part of this position he'd gotten wrong. Goo Mahng hesitated as he looked at Morsi. Then he knelt, falling to his knees by the bed of Shih Manor's master, down by the man's feet. In the past, he hadn't cared if others were satisfied with him, but he depended on the person before him for sustenance. Since the meat on tomorrow's table was at stake, he hoped that he could lift Morsi's spirits. But Morsi didn't look satisfied. Did anyone ever tell you what it means to kneel? He glanced downward and asked in a chilling tone. Goo Mahng shook his head. Getting on your knees denotes submission, humility, and deference. Morsi stared at him. But there's none of that in your face. You only bent your knees. Your back is still straight. Goo Mahng said nothing. It seemed as though he had no idea what to say. He remained kneeling, blinking in helpless bewilderment. The frank honesty of his gaze verged on rudeness. This was indeed why he had infuriated everyone who had instructed him to kneel. Though he got down on his knees, there was no shame on his face. Over the past 2 years, so many people had sought to see him humbled and ruined, wanted to see him live a life worse than death, but no one had succeeded. Goo Mahng was like a blank sheet of paper, calmly accepting all their venom and disdain. His ignorance had become his greatest shield. Morsi's rage flared once more. He grabbed Goo Mahng by the jaw and leaned over to stare into his eyes. His aura was like a sword unsheathing with a metallic clang, ready to run Goo Mahng through. Goo Mahng, do you really think I wouldn't lay a hand on you? After staring at him for a long while, Goo Mahng's response was to ask unexpectedly, Did you drink? Stunned silent, Morsi froze. He seemed to have been reminded of something. He let go of Goo Mahng at once, as if burned. He had used too much strength. His fingers had branded 2 bright red marks on Goo Mahng's pale cheek. Morsi turned away, voice stormy. That's none of your business. Goo Mahng touched his own cheek. There were lots of people who drink at Luomei Pavilion. They drink a lot, and then they'd become very bad. That's called being drunk, Morsi said coldly. Then are you drunk? Morsi turned and shot him a glare. If I were drunk, could I still talk to you like this? Then have you been drunk before? Outside, the snow fell whisper soft, and the northern wind wailed. For a moment, neither spoke, and the only sound within the room came from the crackling brazier. I've never been drunk. Only once did I have a little too much. Just that once. You saw me, you teased me, and you forgave me. From then on, I kept myself strictly in check and never allowed myself such lack of restraint again. How did you forget? How could you forget? How dare you forget? These words roiled in his heart, hot as steam, but the sentence that left his mouth was coldly unfeeling. My affairs are no concern of yours. Goo Mahng fell silent. The two of them looked wordlessly at each other. Morsi stared at Goo Mahng as if he could see through those limpid blue eyes directly into Goo Mahng's heart. Morsi thought, if only he could see straight in. If only he could cruelly tear this man apart, pierce him through. If only he could get a good look at the secrets in his bones, the currents in his blood, the filth in his soul. If he could see how dirty the man kneeling before him was, perhaps he'd let go of this persistent attachment. Goo Mahng wiggled his bare feet and asked, When you told me to keep you company, did you want us to stare at each other? Morsi glared. Don't be ridiculous. Then what do you want me to do? Morsi began to think in earnest malice, deliberating tearing his gaze away from Goo Mahng. The words, You'll keep me company tonight, were clearly suggestive and inappropriate, but neither man thought of it that way. Morsi was truly determined to refuse Goo Mahng a peaceful slumber if he himself couldn't sleep, and Goo Mahng had accepted the camaraderie of sharing sleep, or the lack thereof, with the man who provided him his meals. Here, you read. I'll sleep. Morsi browsed his bookshelf, then tossed a scroll titled Legends of Divine Catastrophe at Goo Mahng. I can't read. Hasn't Li Wei been teaching you for the past month? Morsi grumpily waved off his protestations and lay down. Read the words you know. Oh. Goo Mahng accepted Legends of Divine Catastrophe and began to read out loud, starting with the title. Legs of Vine Cat. Morsi nearly smacked him in the face with a pillow. When Goo Mahng finished reading, Morsi had not understood a single sentence of this book he'd memorized at the age of 5. Whatever Goo Mahng had read aloud was a work of literature entirely novel to Morsi. In the second half of the night, the still sleepless Morsi rolled out of bed, glared balefully at Goo Mahng for a long interval, then suddenly yanked him upright. Where are we going? The study. Goo Mahng had been kneeling for a long time, so his legs were numb with pins and needles when he was abruptly lifted to his feet. After staggering a few steps, he crumbled to the ground, and, as he fell, he instinctively reached out to grab something. In his disoriented state, the closest thing to him was Morsi, so he wrapped his arms around Morsi's waist. The coldest days of winter were upon them, but the coal fire in the room was roaring, and Morsi, hot-blooded and hale, was dressed very lightly. When Goo Mahng embraced him, the only thing separating him from Morsi's slender waist was a thin layer of underclothes. Morsi's abs rose and fell with his breath beneath Goo Mahng's palms, and those ever-tidy lapels had been pulled askew, exposing a glimpse of his well-muscled chest. Morsi turned to level him with a dark and inscrutable stare. If any ordinary woman were in Goo Mahn's place, or even certain men, they would definitely be swooning over Shihejun's masculine scent and imposing physique. But Goo Mahn's past affections had faded, and it seemed that, as a wolf, he had no interest in matters of love. Thus, he saw nothing noteworthy about the male body in front of him. If he were pressed for his thoughts, he'd probably say that his body felt hard and hot and seemed to carry a whiff of danger. Let go. Morsi gritted out between clenched teeth. With his arms still wrapped around Morsi's waist, Goo Mahng looked up at him with those blue eyes and said baldly, I can't stand up. He pointed at his legs. They're not working. Morsi's expression darkened further and further. They're just numb. They still work fine. I said, let go of me. At the sight of Morsi's riled expression, Goo Mahng thought to himself that this man really was easily set off. He clearly had no clue how to care for his companions. Even Fandou was better than him in this respect. He thus silently released Morsi and staggered to his feet. Almost immediately, Morsi pushed open the door and, without looking back, walked through the colonnade into the study. The manor's study was secluded and sparsely furnished. It was therefore unsurprising that the room did not contain a coal brazier. Morsi had a fire-type cord to begin with, which, coupled with his hot-blooded vigor, meant that the cold didn't bother him in the least. Dressed in a single, thin robe, he strode over to the desk. He glanced back at Goo Mahng, who was hovering by the door, and said, Get the hell in here. Hop to it. Goo Mahng paused for a second, then crouched low to the ground. What are you doing? Starting from the doorstep, Goo Mahng began to hop over. Once, twice. Morsi was about to implode with fury. I didn't mean literally. Goo Mahng looked up and sighed. Okay, then you tell me how to do it. If not for the look on his face, indicating that he was humbly and agreeably seeking instruction, Morsi could have mistaken him for the old incorrigible Goo Mahng trying to tease him. Morsi resisted the urge to blow up with all he had and said, Come here. It seemed like Goo Mahng was worried he'd infuriate his volatile companion again. I don't need to hop over there anymore, right? Walk. Goo Mahng stood up and walked to Morsi. He watched Morsi calmly, awaiting his next words. Morsi looked through the titles on the shelf for a book suitable for introductory reading and came away empty-handed. Frowning, he grabbed a brush and paper, along with an inkstone and ink stick, and laid them on the rosewood desk. How many words have you learned from Li Wei? Goo Mahng counted on his fingers. After using all his fingers, he wiggled his bare feet and continued counting on his toes. When he had determined that the words he knew outnumbered all the fingers and toes put together, he crowed proudly. Lots. Morsi pulled out a chair. Sit. Goo Mahng sat and cast Morsi an inquisitive glance. Morsi crossed his arms and leaned against the rosewood table, looking Goo Mahng up and down. With a wave of his hand, a wisp of flame issued from his palm and lit all the lamps in the room. I'll be the judge of that. What does judge mean? It means I'll say something, and you'll write it out. Bad habits learned at Luomei Pavilion were likely still stuck in Goo Manhng's mind. He clumsily took up the brush, dipped it in ink, then asked, If I can write them, will there be a reward? You'll be punished if you can't. Goo Manhng's eager expression turned anxious. He tentatively asked, No more food for me? Goo Mahng glanced at him without replying. Under the golden candlelight, Goo Manhng's thin face was so close to his. His eyes, so blue they seemed to have been rinsed by the sea, were fixed on Morsi. Since the day Goo Mahng came to Shiha Manor, Morsi had very rarely seen the numbness and apathy he'd had in his eyes when they were first reunited at Luomei Pavilion. Humanity was gradually returning to Goo Manhng's gaze, but no matter how many times Morsi tried, he never unearthed even the tiniest hint that Goo Mahng still remembered his past. Morsi said, We'll talk about it. I need to have food, Goo Mahng persisted, or else I'm gonna be hungry. Morsi glared at him. What makes you think you can bargain with me? Right. Sloppy handwriting splotched across the paper. Morsi would say a word and Goo Mahng would write it out. If he wrote it correctly, Morsi would remain silent, but if he got it wrong, Morsi would call him an idiot. Morsi made Goo Mahng write the numbers 1 through 5, followed by Goo Manhng's own name and even Morsi's name. Still utterly unsatisfied with his emotions in turmoil, Morsi demanded Goo Mahng write, In life I'll return to you, in death I will yearn for you. And this longing will only end when we see each other again. Footnotes 11 and 12. The first saying comes from the poem Ode to My Wife by the Han Dynasty statesman Su Wu. And the second phrase comes from the poem Long Yearning by Song Dynasty poet Yan Jidao. Returning to the reading. Even when it was clear Goo Mahng couldn't possibly know how to write any of these words, Morsi refused to let him go. Instead, he pinned him to the chair and forbade him from moving. I don't know how. Goo Mahng was woeful. The light in the room was soft and dim, the snow outside a hazy white. Morsi looked at the crooked words strewn messily all over the page. In each line of yearning verse, there were mistakes in every direction. He walked behind Goo Mahng and took the brush. I'll teach you. A sleet struck the windowsill. Goo Mahng sat in his chair while Morsi's tall figure leaned over him. Each of Morsi's brushstrokes was peerlessly beautiful, exquisitely elegant. He wrote, and Goo Mahng copied him clumsily. Halfway through, he couldn't hold back a sneeze. Morsi's hand stilled, and he looked down. Cold? Goo Mahng didn't like to inconvenience other people, especially other men. This stubborn streak showed even now. He shook his head, only to sneeze again. Go put on a coat. If you freeze to death, it'd be a bother having to take care of you. It's only a little cold. Goo Mahng rubbed his nose. Not too bad. Morsi simply could not insist after that. If he kept on demanding, it would seem like he cared about him, so he continued teaching Goo Mahng to write. But as the lesson wore on, Goo Mahng couldn't bear the cold any more. Without conscious thought, he began instinctively inching toward the only heat source in the room, Morsi. Little by little, he edged closer. Morsi, immersed in his instruction, was unaware of Goo Manhng's movements at first, By the time he noticed, Goo Mahng was already tucked close to him, a wolf seeking warmth from its pack, as though, in the next breath, he'd nestle into Morsi's embrace. Morsi's eyes darkened. Without a word, he set the brush aside and seized Goo Mahng by the jaw, forcing him to look up. Morsi narrowed his eyes in stormy displeasure. When I told you to get the hell out and put some clothes on, you refused. Now what? Chapter 52. Unintentional Seduction. Goo Mahng watched him, his bare feet fidgeting anxiously beneath the table. Fandou and I sit together to keep warm. Morsi shot him an impassive glance. So? You're not wearing a lot, so you're cold. I'm not wearing a lot, so I'm also cold. We're both cold, but when we're close together, it'll be warm. Silence. Morsi was a cut sleeve, and Goo Mahng had been his lover. Footnote number 13, just in case people don't already know, cut sleeve is gay. It originates from an anecdote from an emperor who cut off his sleeve rather than wake his male lover who was sleeping on it. Returning to the reading. His rational mind was like a towering city wall, containing any improper impulses, but it couldn't lock away his physical instincts. He knew very well how strongly he'd react to Goo Mahng. If they sat in such close proximity, in such thin clothes, there would be consequences beyond mere warmth. He felt indignant, as if he'd been deliberately seduced. Even though said seduction was a figment of his own imagination, his expression darkened noticeably. He stared at Goo Mahng for a while, then abruptly let go of his jaw. He grabbed a piece of paper to wipe his fingers with disgust and said frostily, "Don't think so highly of yourself." So we can't? Who the hell do you think you are? In the face of these harsh words, Goo Mahng's face showed no hint of sadness. He only turned to look at Morsi, his every emotion clearly written across his face. Morsi could read his confusion, his bewilderment, his trepidation, but saw nothing there that brought him joy. If he could just hurt Goo Mahng even the tiniest bit, Morsi thought he wouldn't feel so maniacal. I thought I was a companion, your companion, replied Goo Mahng. Morsi didn't speak. After a moment, he reached out and hooked a finger around the slave collar on Goo Mahng's neck. His fingertip slowly traced its way downward until it flicked the metal tag on its pitch-black iron ring. Eyes downcast, Morsi said, "You thought I would be companions with someone wearing this? You are a traitor. I am your mortal enemy," he murmured. "This will not change. Goo Mahng, we can never go back." As the year came to an end, Morsi grew even more convinced that Goo Mahng wasn't faking his condition at all. Goo Mahng had indeed forfeited all his memories and reason after he lost those two souls. This sent him into a long period of brooding discontent. One day, after returning from court, Morsi received a message that Medicine Master Jiang had finally returned from his travels. Jiang Fuli was Chonghua's finest medicine grandmaster and was well equipped to take on even the most difficult cases. Although Morsi considered Goo Mahng to be a nearly hopeless one, Jiang Fuli was still worth a try. Thus, Morsi brought Goo Mahng along with his last bit of hope to Jiang Manor. Jiang Fuli was eccentric and arrogant in the extreme. Among Chonghua's three poisons of greed, wrath, and ignorance, greed was Muzhong Lian, and ignorance was Muzhong Chuyi. As for wrath, he was a man who despised anyone who displeased him and blew up whenever he didn't get his way. He was utterly irrational and did whatever he desired in the moment. This individual was none other than Medicine Master Jiang Fuli. The venerable medicine master had talent enough to dispense with all social etiquette. He cared nothing for tact and always did things his own way. I heard that when he returned to the manor and learned that Madame Jiang had met with Li Qingtian, he was so angry he didn't speak to her all day. He asked if she was sick in the head and said he hoped she'd get well soon. Yeah, why'd he say that? I'm not sure either. He probably thought Madame was too reckless. I heard he called on Yue Manor to have it out with Muzhong Chuyi. He said Muzhong Chuyi shouldn't have meddled and gotten his wife involved. Ignorance versus wrath. Did Muzhong Chuyi not start a fight with him? Muzhong Chuyi wasn't even there. Jiang Fuli smashed 10 of Yue Manor's tea sets before he left in rage. He swore that if Muzhong Chuyi dared involve his wife again, he'd personally come to tie him up, toss him into a cauldron, and refine him into medicine. The young Yue Gongzi was trying to hold him back, and I heard Jiang Fuli made him cry. Wow, he's so scary. Indeed he was. Morsi had crossed paths with Jiang Fuli before, and the man had left a terrible impression on him. If there were literally anyone else he could ask for help, he would have never thought of visiting Jiang Manor. But when he turned and saw Goo Mahng lying in the sun next to Fandou with his eyes half closed, he felt he had no other choice. With Jiang Manor's great hall, 2 opulent dangling lanterns patterned with interwoven branches burned brightly, and thousands of whale oil lamps transformed night into midday. All the decor was of exquisite craftsmanship, 100-fold more costly than the average cultivator could afford. It was a sight of utter extravagance. When they arrived, dinner had just concluded. The housekeeper brought out generous servings of tea and refreshments and dispatched someone to the rear building to inform the boss of the Jiang clan, Jiang Fuli. Contrary to Morsi's expectations, they were kept waiting for a long time. Morsi sat and rested his eyes, while Goo Mahng scarfed down snacks from the plate. The celadon glazed Yue-ware platter held peach blossom pastries, flour cakes, and fruits preserved in honey. He shoved each and every one of them into his mouth. After cleaning his own plate and licking his lips, he still seemed unsatisfied. With a furtive glance, he reached a hand toward Morsi's plate. Morsi didn't blink, so Goo Mahng confidently continued feasting. "Are you very hungry?" Morsi asked out of the blue. The question caught Goo Mahng unawares. "Do you want it?" he mumbled indistinctly. "There's still some left. I thought you weren't eating." "I'm not," Morsi said lightly. "Okay, then I'll take care of it for you." The last 2 words were muffled as Goo Mahng shoved another peach blossom pastry into his mouth. He tried to speak around his bulging cheeks, but all that came out were sounds of munching. Morsi said nothing, but his brow furrowed ever so slightly. He was sick of witnessing Goo Mahng's slovenly table manners. He turned to ask the housekeeper, "What's taking so long? Is your lord busy with some urgent matter?" "The proprietor is treating Chang Fengjuan's daughter right now," said the housekeeper. "He should be finished soon." Morsi frowned. "I've been hearing a lot of Chang Fengjuan recently. What illness does his daughter have?" "Madness of the heart," the housekeeper answered. "Chang Fengjuan's daughter has an unmanageably strong spiritual core, and she's very young, so she can't control herself. She's already hurt so many little lords and ladies at the Cultivation Academy." He sighed and continued in a sympathetic tone. "She's only 7. When her illness isn't flaring up, she's quiet and well-behaved, very polite, but no one wants to be her friend. She's really quite the poor little thing." "Can her illness be cured?" "Not quickly," said the housekeeper. "And if she continues to hurt people, the Academy intends to destroy her spiritual core and expel her." At this, Morsi paused. "Wouldn't that mean she'd never be able to cultivate again?" "Not only that, it would be very risky to destroy a core like hers. If anything were to go wrong, it could break her mind as well." Morsi did not know what to say about that. Chang Fengjuan and his wife had their daughter late in life. They never imagined it would turn out like this. Her father and mother had no tears left to shed. The housekeeper sighed. "The little girl has been trying to keep herself in check, to slowly bring her spiritual core under control. She's been making steady progress, but—" Another sigh. "Shizun knows that the Academy is full of noble heirs and offspring. No one wants to risk it with a heart-mad child. Chang Fengjuan pleaded and begged and pulled every string he could to let her stay this long, but the other noble lords are deeply opposed to it. If she injures anyone else, no matter whom, I'm afraid she won't be allowed to remain." Morsi suddenly remembered the time Chang Fengjuan had sent him gifts, so this was the reason. He was about to speak when a man's imposing voice rang out from the inner hall. "Lao Zhou, what a big mouth you have! Who let you carelessly divulge patient's affairs? The housekeeper's mouth immediately snapped shut. Morsi turned to see a man who looked to be in his 30s emerge from behind the screen of golden silk. This man wore exquisitely embroidered robes of bluish green, their many overlapping layers crisscrossing at his lapels. His sash was straight and neat. With an audible flick of his long sleeves, the man sat at the place of honor with no hesitation. He looked up with light-brown almond eyes, features as sharp as his manner was haughty. "Medicine Master Jiang," Morsi said. Jiang Fuli placed his hands on the arms of his chair as his gaze swept over his guests. His thin lips pursed. Then he said, without any pleasantries, "You're healthy. You don't need treatment." "What about him?" asked Morsi. Jiang Fuli glanced again at Morsi. "He's ruined. There is no treatment." Morsi had already lost most of his hope that Goo Mahng might still retain his memories, but hearing Jiang Fuli's declaration with his own ears still made his heart sink. He closed his eyes for a few beats before he asked, undeterred, "Is there no hope for recovery at all?" "There is." Jiang Fuli arched a brow and scoffed. "Search heaven and hell for his 2 scattered souls, and all his problems will be solved. The question is, does Shizun know where to look?" If anyone else had spoken to him like this, Morsi would have already flipped his lid. But such was Jiang Fuli's power. Everyone in Chonghua disliked him, calling him an evil profiteer and a heartless salesman who made his fortune from exploiting the dying. But no one in Chonghua would dare raise a hand to him, not even the emperor himself. All this because Jiang Fuli was a one-of-a-kind miracle healer. Morsi looked at Goo Mahng, who was staring blankly at the dessert plate, before he turned back to Jiang Fuli and asked, "Would the medicine master perchance know of any other methods by which he might recover some memories?" "If it's just a few memories you're after, nothing else is needed," Jiang Fuli said curtly. "The soul responsible for memory has been removed, but that doesn't mean he's forgotten everything in his past. As time goes on, he'll naturally recover some of it." Morsi's heart skipped a beat. "How much would he be able to recover?" "Depends on his luck," Jiang Fuli said. "But without restoring the 2 souls he lost, most of it won't return." Seeing the sudden shadow in Morsi's eyes, Jiang Fuli sneered. "To be honest, when it comes to memory, it's better to either recover it all or forget everything entirely. It's more torturous to have nothing but fragmented recollections. If I were him, I'd rather stay ignorant like this. It hurt a lot less." The candle flame guttered. Jiang Fuli leaned back against the soft cushions and lazily continued from this more comfortable position. "Anyway, human minds are unpredictable. If he were to regain some memory, who knows what it would be?" Morsi's heart pounded at Jiang Fuli's words. It was true. If Goo Mahng recovered some piece of his memory by the whims of fate, who could guess what it might reveal? In his old life, Goo Mahng had kept too many secrets and endured too much devastation. On the lighter side was his relationship with Morsi and the humiliation he'd suffered at Mu Zhonglian's hands. On the heavier side were the military secrets of the Wang Bao army and the pressure he'd faced from the emperor. If Goo Mahng suddenly remembered some of these fragmented scraps, how would he feel? The mere thought of it chilled Morsi to the bone. It was clear that Jiang Fuli knew what was on Morsi's mind. With a dark smile, he asked, "Does that scare you?" Morsi made no reply. If he remembered how His Imperial Majesty treated him without understanding the full context, he'd become even more deranged, uncontrollably so. Jiang Fuli continued. To resolve the matter at that point, Shizun would be no easy task. Morsi saw how unruffled Jiang Fuli's features were beneath the lamplight. "You have medicine," said Morsi. It was not a question. "Aren't you clever?" Jiang Fuli scoffed. "I may not have methods to restore his memories, but I can write plenty of prescriptions that would help him avoid dark recollections." This handsome man wore a shrewd expression as he fiddled with the jade rings on his hand, like a hunter waiting for his prey to jump into the net. "Are you interested?" Of course Morsi would not be daunted by expense. He lounged in his chair, one elbow propped on the backrest, long legs crossed in his black military boots, not even looking up as he said, "Name your price." Sure. The thought of money improved Jiang Fuli's mood. You're certainly more straightforward than His Imperial Majesty. His Imperial Majesty also knows that he might regain some memories. Why would I keep it from him? Jiang Fuli replied. But he didn't care for the consequences and wanted Goo Mahng to remember as much as possible. Morsi was silent for a spell. Just write the prescription, he said at last. To be clear, this prescription is for calming the spirit, Jiang Fuli said. Although it helps hold back bad memories, it cannot control the choices that Goo Mahng might make in response. If he someday remembers something that causes great anguish and you open your eyes and find him rushing at your neck with a knife, I certainly won't offer a refund. He drummed fingers pale as white jade on the table and gestured at the Medicine Master Manners signboard with a haughty tilt of his chin. Everything will be done according to Jiang Manners' rules. Morsi refused to grace Jiang Fuli's rotten signboard with a single glance. The first time he had seen it as a youth left a deep impression in his heart, forever changing his naive notion of healers as benevolent saviors. Other medicine halls, no matter how useless, still hung up precepts like medicine in the service of the people or fair treatment knows no age. Medicine Master Jiang's board, on the other hand, contained a brash exhortation. Mess with Jiang, die by Jiang. Without a shred of restraint, Jiang Fuli asked, Do you understand? Morsi's face remained impassive. Prescribe the medicine. All right. One course of treatment will be 70,000 gold calories. Not even the Jiang Manor housekeeper thought this a reasonable price, but he quickly masked his snort with a cough. Excuse me, I have a cold. Jiang Fuli shot him a glance, baring his teeth in an eerie smile. Okay, I'll give you medicine too. Housekeeper Zhou fell silent. Morsi procured several gold-calorie notes from his tianquan pouch. This made Goo Mahng perk up and crane his neck for a closer look. After living in Luomei Pavilion for so long, the words he understood best were cowrie shells. His companion was about to spend money. He was about to spend calories, not just calories, but golden calories, and not just golden calories, but 70,000 in one go. How many clients would he have had to take to earn that much money? As Morsi was about to hand the money over to that mean, almond-eyed man, Goo Mahng objected. His hand shot out to grab Morsi's wrist, and he solemnly shook his head. Don't give it to him. Morsi looked at him. It's my money. Goo Mahng didn't budge. Let go. After thinking it over, Goo Mahng couldn't find a good reason to stop him. He could only sigh as he loosened his grip. Money's all gone. Will we have to go hungry? Morsi ignored him and put on the table 7 notes worth 10,000 gold calories apiece. With a push of his fingertips, he sent them toward Jiang Fuli. Jiang Fuli's expression when he looked at that money might have been sweeter than even when he looked at his own wife. He accepted the notes and ordered the housekeeper to bring paper and a brush. He then slid the narrow red sandal box to the other side of the table toward himself. He produced a crystal eyepiece and placed it over his left eye, then took up a weasel fur brush in his pale fingers and began to write. Goo Mahng was slowly recovering his sense of boldness, likely because his life had improved significantly after he left Luomei Pavilion. His attitude was no longer one of excessive apathy and indifference. Curiosity had returned to his scarred and wounded body. At the sight of Jiang Fuli's crystal monocule, he asked, What's that? Jiang Fuli replied blandly, An eyepiece. Why do you need to wear it? I'm night blind. What's that? It means I can't see clearly at night. Then why do you only wear one? Only my left eye is affected. Goo Mahng hummed in understanding, but upon further consideration, he found a gap in Jiang Fuli's logic. Night blindness means you can't see when it's dark, but your room is so bright and shiny. It's a magical injury, not a normal illness. My left eye will become blind as soon as night falls. No matter how many lamps I light, they're only any use for my right eye. Jiang Fuli peered at him coldly from behind the eyepiece. Does General Goo have any further questions? I don't like to be disturbed when writing prescriptions. No more, Goo Mahng replied sincerely. There were 70 or so different herbs in the prescription. Jiang Fuli ordered someone to bring out a golden abacus. As his pale fingers flew over the beads to check prices, he simultaneously examined the prescription for dangerous interactions between herbs. "This is your prescription. Here you go," Jiang Fuli said. "Come here tomorrow to pick up the medicine." Morsi took the prescription. He had nothing left to say to Jiang Fuli. Seeing that they were more or less finished, he prepared to leave. But at this moment, Jiang Fuli called him back. "Hold on. Does Medicine Master have more instructions?" "There's one more thing." Jiang Fuli looked at the servant standing at the side of the room. "All of you, withdraw." "Yes." After the servant's departure, only 3 people remained in the hall. Jiang Fuli finished his tea before he looked up. "Shizun, I wish to ask you about a trifling matter. When the sword spirit Li Qingqian sought out my wife, were you at the scene?" Morsi nodded. Jiang Fuli's face stiffened for an instant. "Did you hear what my wife said to him?" Madame Jiang spoke very softly. "I heard nothing." This answer seemed to displease Jiang Fuli. His pale, thin lips moved slightly, as if to silently curse someone out. He asked again, "Does anything survive of the Hongshao sword?" "A hilt remains." Jiang Fuli's gaze abruptly sharpened. "In whose possession?" "Muzhong Chuyi's. Why do you ask?" Jiang Fuli did not immediately reply. At the mention of Muzhong Chuyi, he swore, then fell silent in brooding thought. "Forget it. There's not much there to investigate." He stood and straightened his clothes, jutting his chin in Goo Mahn's direction. He said, "Right, Shizun, I must warn you about something. If you don't want him to remember those dark memories, there's one more thing beyond taking the medicine as prescribed that's very important." "Medicine Master, please advise." Jiang Fuli wagged a finger at him. "Try to keep him away from objects related to his past. A person's mind is very hard to predict. It's very possible that something he wouldn't have otherwise recalled could be brought back by something as insignificant as a whiff of scent. You must remember this." Chapter 53. I'll feed you. Goo Mahng didn't like drinking the medicine Jiang Fuli had prescribed. The reason was very simple. It was too spicy. Jiang Fuli's formulation triggered coughs at the first sip. The master himself had said that the medicine's flavor absolutely couldn't be changed without sacrificing its efficacy. This left Li Wei at a loss. Don't they say sweet fragrances are cleansing? Shouldn't emotional troubles be treated with sweet medicine? When word of this reached Jiang Fuli, his response was, "The hell does he mean? Who's the medicine master, him or me?" Thus, the sight of Li Wei chasing Goo Mahng in desperation, begging and pleading with his noble self to please take his medicine, became a daily occurrence in ErHa Manor. It was a scene of utter chaos that never failed to take up at least an hour. Morsi liked peace and quiet and hated noise, so Li Wei usually tried to force-feed Goo Mahng his medicine only while Morsi was at court. But today, Goo Mahng's resistance proved to be too much. Li Wei had crashed into a dozen other servants, and he still hadn't nabbed Goo Mahng. To add injury to insult, Goo Mahng had even kicked Li Wei squarely in the chest, nearly causing him to break the medicine jar. Seeing that Goo Mahng was about to escape the yard, Li Wei shouted as he chased after him, "Grab him! Grab him! Use the immortal binding ropes! God damn it!" As Goo Mahng sprinted away, he turned to glance behind him. With a sudden thud, he crashed into something both hot and hard. He hissed in pain and clutched his forehead. When he looked up, he met Morsi's dark eyes, which leveled him with a cold stare. "What are you doing?" Morsi asked, towering over Goo Mahng. Panting, Li Wei caught up to them and shouted, my lord, he won't take his medicine." Morsi had just returned from court and was still wreathed in an icy chill of the outside air. For a moment, he stared at Goo Mahng in silence. Just as Goo Mahng realized he was in deep trouble and prepared to flee, Morsi grabbed his wrist. His eyes fixed on his quarry, Morsi raised his other hand. "Li Wei, I'm here. Give me the medicine jar." Morsi hauled Goo Mahng into the side room, kicked the door shut with a boot, and shoved Goo Mahng against the wall. The room was dim behind the hanging bamboo curtains. In the darkness, Morsi's eyes glowed with a gloomy light. After staring at Goo Mahng for some time, he bit out, "You've lost all your good habits, yet your bad ones haven't changed in the slightest." Goo Mahng had had the same trouble in the past. He'd rather remain sick than take his medicine, exactly like he was right now. Morsi recalled a time he paid Goo Mahng a visit back then. Goo Mahng had been curled up in his tent, grumbling as he lay wrapped in blankets, only an errant lock of black hair visible. When he heard someone come in, he thought it was Lu Jiangxing. Without even bothering to open his eyes, he muttered, "Jiangxing, don't bring me more medicine. I won't fucking drink it. The smell is gross enough." The young Morsi walked over to him, put the steaming medicine on the table, and sat down next to the bed. "It's me," he murmured. "Holy shit." Goo Mahng stuck his head out from the blankets, drowsy-eyed and scarlet-cheeked with fever. "What are you doing here?" he mumbled. Morsi didn't respond. He reached out and touched Goo Mangh's face. "Take your medicine." "I won't." Goo Mahng rolled his eyes and tried to burrow back into his blankets, but Morsi pulled him out again. "Fine then, keep burning up." "Sure, whatever. Once the fever cooks me through, I can eat myself. The medicine is too disgusting. I won't touch it." Morsi frowned. "Are you even a man?" Now this bothered Goo Mahng. He whipped his head around and glared as sharply as he could through hazy and feverish eyes. "You don't know if I'm a man?" he grumbled. "You couldn't tell when you slept with me? You little bastard. Your Guga's a self-patriot who's fucking burning up to high heaven. It's one thing if you're not clapping for me and giving me flowers, but you're actually questioning my sex. You little scoundrel." Goo Mahng was half awake and delirious, sniffling and mumbling a stream of pure nonsense. Morsi took all this in with amusement and tenderness. He gazed with gentle eyes at his sugar curled up in his messy pile of blankets. "It's easy for you to say," muttered Goo Mahng, his cheeks flaming red. "You have no idea how bitter this goddamn medicine is." This was meant to be a complaint, and if he were fully awake, Goo Mahng would definitely have used a swaggering tone full of brash arrogance. Alas, he wasn't in the right state to pull it off. His eyes were unfocused and his lips were wet. His manner as he upbraided Morsi wasn't the least bit imposing. Rather, all that remained was boundless softness. If Morsi had voiced his thoughts at that moment, Goo Mahng would have definitely flown into a rage, sickness be damned, and throttled him. Because to Morsi, Goo Mahng seemed like he was acting pouty on purpose. This flight of fancy made him feel warm and impulsive. He looked down at Goo Shishong tangled up in the blankets, and for a long while he stared. Then, with his eyes still fixed on Goo Mangh's face, he picked up the bowl of medicine on the table. Goo Mahng thought Morsi was going to force it down his throat. He was so mad he started yelling. "Morsi, get the fuck out of here. I said I won't drink it, and I mean it. The rest of the sentence never left his mouth. His Morshudi had actually taken a sip of medicine and then dipped his head to kiss him. The bitterness of the medicine filled both of their mouths, but Goo Mangh's senses were completely drowned out by Morsi's blazing breath and his rough and insistent tongue. Goo Mahng felt disoriented, like he was black-out drunk. His eyes flew open. The medicine was highly concentrated, so there wasn't much in the bowl, but Morsi kissed him at least a dozen times before it was gone. By then, Goo Mahng had finally returned to his senses and wanted to call him a little madman, but that rough tongue, having fed him the last few drops, pressed into his mouth. As their lips entwined ferociously, some medicine even dipped from the corner of Goo Mangh's mouth. Back then, they had been young and reckless, their newborn love flourishing so fearlessly in their hearts that, when they were caught up in each other, they didn't even care that someone might lift the tent flap and see. When Morsi finally let go of Goo Mahng, he nuzzled his Goo Sugar's cheek. He stared at Goo Mahng, the flushed face beneath him reflected in his dark pupils. It was as if he wished to build an impregnable cage in his eyes and trap this singular reflection within it for the rest of eternity. Morsi's voice was a little hoarse. He caressed Goo Mahn's lips, which his kisses had left wet and slightly swollen. "Is it bitter?" he asked, his voice low and captivating. "Why do I then think that Shizun's very sweet?" Goo Mahng gritted his teeth. "Not candy. Sweet my ass." Morsi gazed into his eyes. They were so close that every time they blinked, their lashes nearly brushed. He murmured, "If I hear about you making a fuss like this when you need to take medicine, I'll feed you like this each and every time. That way, you can't tell me I have no idea what it tastes like. I know you don't like bitter things, so I'll share in all your bitterness." Goo Mahng rolled his eyes. "Me? Afraid of bitterness? Funny joke. Could your Goo Mahng Guga be scared of a little bitterness?" In response, Morsi only tapped his forehead and rose, wiping the corner of his mouth. Goo Mahng squinted at him. After a long pause, he snickered. "I've realized that you're not actually a proper gentleman. Although you're stuffy, you've sure got quite the imagination." The young Morsi was prone to embarrassment. He tried his best to feign calm, but this assessment of himself still made his ears flush red. "Once you get married," Goo Mahng continued, "I'll count it as that maiden's good fortune." Morsi whipped around to stare at him. Back then, he'd wanted to say, "No, that's not true. When I choose someone, I mean it for a lifetime, in life or death, in poverty or in riches. I'll only follow in his footsteps. I'll only want him and him alone. Don't you understand?" His lips moved, but he knew, without saying it, how Goo Mahng would respond. Goo Mahng would brush it off and subject him to a grating lecture on nonsense like promiscuity is male instinct. Goo Mahng didn't understand that some people's hearts shouldn't be touched. They never played around. Rather, they were the solitary guardians of the pure affection they held cupped in their hands. They only had a little bit of romance in their hearts, just enough to lavish on a singular person in all their life. Goo Mahng had enough affection to rival the rivers and the lakes. He wouldn't understand. In the present, in the dim side room, Morsi stared into Goo Mahng's blue eyes. After his bones had been broken and his souls removed, after so much had changed, how did he still have this infuriating problem? "Open your mouth," Morsi ordered. Goo Mahng glared at him in clear refusal. Morsi grabbed him by the jaw and moved to pour it down his throat. At first, Goo Mahng kept his lips clamped shut, but Morsi wasn't planning to play nice. He covered Goo Mahng's mouth and nose so he couldn't breathe. He waited until Goo Mahng was red-faced and struggling before abruptly letting go. As Goo Mahng opened his mouth to gasp for air, Morsi grabbed his chin and poured the medicine in. Goo Mahng burst out coughing and his eyes reddened as he rasped, "Why are you making me drink this?" Morsi gritted his teeth and snapped, "Because there's something wrong with you. From now on, when Li Wei asks you to take your medicine, you'd better drink it obediently," he warned. "If you refuse, I have no choice but to administer it myself. I'll do it by force." He caught sight of a drop of medicine at the corner of Goo Mahng's mouth. "Clean yourself up," he said, and then strode away without a backward glance. After that, Goo Mahng was obedient indeed. Li Wei always gave him a bowl of milk or a piece of candy after he took his medicine. Morsi, on the other hand, gave him nothing, but instead stared at him with an inscrutable expression after forcing him to swallow it down. Goo Mahng didn't understand what that stare meant, but he felt an instinctive chill at the back of his neck. They finished one full course of treatment in this manner. 3 days before the end-of-year ceremony, Morsi took Goo Mahng to the Jiang residence for a second examination. Housekeeper Zhou led them through the great hall into a lavishly decorated room where Jiang Fuli was in conversation with a middle-aged man. The man wore a cultivator's robe of purple trimmed in gold, signifying his noble bloodline. However, his face was exhausted and his posture was hunched. He looked nothing like a high-spirited aristocrat. A young girl with delicate features waited at his side, also dressed in purple clothes with golden trim. She kept her head bowed and said not a word. Holding a little bamboo dragonfly in her hand, she looked endearingly sweet. Morsi didn't recognize this downtrodden noble at first, but as soon as he saw the child, he realized that this must be Changfeng-jun and his heart-mad daughter. As they walked in, Changfeng-jun was wiping his tears and stammering his thanks to Jiang Fuli. "You should go back to your manor," said Jiang Fuli. "Your daughter can stay here temporarily. Since I've been paid well, I'll take good care of her, of course. You needn't worry." "I'm so thankful to Medicine Master Jiang. The memorial ceremony is in 3 days. I won't be in the capital, and there's no way I could feel at ease if I left Lanar at home." "Good business is good business. You're neither buying any credit nor owing me money. So what are you thanking me for?" Changfeng-jun patted the little girl, Lanar's, head, striving to summon some cheer on her weary face. "Sweetheart, in a few days, Papa will be going to the memorial ceremony with His Imperial Majesty. It's a hard journey, so I can't take you alone. You need to be good and stay in Dr. Jiang's manor. Don't cause him any trouble, okay?" Though Lanar was young, it was obvious that she had already been pushed around and bullied a great deal on account of her illness. She seemed extraordinarily sensible and obedient. Her words and actions were all very soft, as if she feared she'd be left behind or bring harm to others. "Papa, how long will you be gone?" "Not long at all. It'll be 7 days at most before Papa will be back to pick you up." Lanar's eyes welled with tears, but she held them back and nodded silently. Changfeng-jun thanked Jiang Fuli again and turned his head just in time to see Morsi and Goo Mahng enter the residence. Probably skittish because the other noble families had shunned him so completely, this middle-aged man with graying temples started like a bird at the twang of a bow. Trembling with a terror unbefitting his age and station, he ducked his head. "Shizun." Morsi found this a difficult sight to bear, but stiff as he was, he merely uttered a word of greeting. As far as he knew, Changfeng-jun had always been honest and dutiful and never involved himself in petty conflicts. These qualities had doomed his noble lineage to cede power and influence day by day. Eventually, even some of the capital's common-born cultivators disregarded him. After Changfeng-jun respectfully greeted Morsi, his fearful eyes flickered toward Goo Mahng. At the same time, Morsi's gaze shifted to land on little Lanar, who was standing beside Jiang Fuli. Each sensing the object of the other's attention, they spoke at the same time, in the same protective tone. "He isn't a danger," Morsi said. "She isn't a danger," Changfeng-jun said. The two of them lapsed into an embarrassed silence. In the end, Morsi was the one to break it. "I understand. Don't worry." These days, Changfeng-jun had to explain his daughter's illness wherever he went and beg each noble family not to expel his daughter from the academy and break her spiritual core. He had suffered untold hardship and humiliation. Upon hearing Shizun's somewhat gracious words, he felt a twinge in his heart and was brought to the verge of tears. He lowered his head to thank Morsi and glanced behind him once more at Lanar. Worried that the longer he stayed, the less he could bear to part from her, he turned to leave the manor. Jiang Fuli took Goo Mangh's pulse and adjusted the prescription anew. Then he rose to his feet. Glancing at Goo Mahng and little Lanar, he said, "Shizun, let's step out to the rear courtyard to talk." Morsi frowned. "And leave them here?" Housekeeper Joe smiled. "Shizun can rest assured. I'm here to keep watch. Nothing will happen. If my patients are able to cause any trouble in my manor, I may as well close up shop," said Jiang Fuli. He glanced at the black ring around Goo Mangh's neck and continued with audible scorn. "Besides, isn't Goo Mahng wearing the slave collar Shizun gave him?" Morsi did in fact know that Jiang Manor's fortifications were on par with those of Yue Manor's. Nothing would go wrong if they stepped away only briefly. He just felt vaguely uneasy and fretful at the thought of Goo Mahng leaving his line of sight while they were out. This feeling hadn't subsided even as they spent more time together. Rather, it had grown only more stubborn and intense. If this went on, Jiang Fuli would likely be gaining yet another patient. Morsi himself. The rear courtyard of Jiang Manor was home to all sorts of rare plants. Spiritual energy circulated here year-round, and it was luxuriantly fragrant in all 4 seasons. Jiang Fuli and Shee conversed as they strolled along the meandering colonnade. "The end-of-year ceremony is in 2 days," Jiang Fuli said. "You pure-blooded nobles are all accompanying His Imperial Majesty to the soul-calling abyss to offer sacrifice, correct?" Shee nodded. "As we do each year. Chang Feng-jun entrusted his daughter to me. But what about you? What is your plan?" "Goo Mahng is too dangerous. I will inform His Imperial Majesty that I intend to bring him with me." "I thought you'd say that," replied Jiang Fuli. "However, I have something important to tell you." He stopped and turned around, framed by the flowers and the sky, hands clasped behind his back. "Goo Mahng's pulse is very steady and shows signs of recovery. On your way to the soul-calling abyss, you must be careful. Anywhere from 5 days to a month from now, he will remember some fragmented pieces." Shee's heart pounded, and his nails dug into his palms. "I'll give you another 7 doses of medicine. Hopefully that'll be enough for the journey. If, by chance, what he remembers is unfavorable for Chonghua, you can lock him up," Jiang Fuli added. "But life is never predictable. Shizun, he'll recover his first memories in the coming days. You must be prepared." Whew, okay. Well, I will say we've reached a good stopping point. I can't go on any further tonight anyway. Man, so I have a few thoughts that I want to share, but I'm not going to share everything, mostly just because so here's the thing. The longer the video I make, the less I feel I can speak. Just because usually I'm not doing these readings in one sitting. It's usually like at 2 different time periods, whether they're in the same day or in the next day. And that kind of takes away from like the gusto of the notes that I have and even the better recollection of everything. Even though I do note things down, it's just not, I don't know how to describe it. It's weird. The point is I have some things to say, but when the videos are longer, I'll probably just have less to say. So, but I mean, that's perfectly fine because we do book reviews we're going to be doing book reviews at the end of each book now. So it's whatever. So for these chapters, these 7 chapters, 47 through 53, I think the first thing that I want to point out is, number 1, based off a note that I had made at the end of the last chapters about Jiang Yexue and feeling like, you know, we haven't gotten a lot of his character, but seeing that he was so nice, it bordered on absurd that I didn't trust him. But after seeing how badly he's treated, even like just a tiny bit, for no good reason, it just made me feel even more inclined to believe that he's got an ace up his sleeve or he's harboring something deep, because clearly he's been heavily mistreated by his actual family members, but he's being so nice about it. Now, don't get me wrong. I mean, I can understand why he would be nice to Yue Changqing, because Yue Changqing is just acting based off of things that have been spoon-fed to him. But still, there's no way in Danmei, because it can be in real life, there's no way he's not harboring something. I don't know. So we shall see. The next thing I wanted to ask, this is just like a random question, and that is, who was the person that gave Goo Mahng this pouch that he treasures so much and sees as important? Is this person still alive? Are they dead? Do they know he's captured? Did they mean him some ill will or not? Like, that is something I want to know that I'm not sure would even be answered within the next book or 2. That seems like something that we may find out late, so we'll just see. The next thing is concerning that whole ordeal about, who's important, the important person chapter. It was interesting to see Goo Mahng tell Shee that he was important because he gave him the necklace, aka the slave collar. All of that is just so sad. We're not going to talk about the slave collar anymore and the symbolism behind it and how it wrecks Shee. Meanwhile, Goo Mahng is just like chilling and everything. But I'm going to go to the next thing. It was very interesting when we got a little bit of breadcrumbs. You guys know I love these breadcrumbs because it was introduced in the last book and now it was in this one. Basically about how there's this whole misconception about Goo Mahng, and at least in this instance of him being, enticing and being with a lot of women and stuff like that, because we got a story where he had actually been working really, really hard at a restaurant to make money for Mosi, because Mosi was being bullied by others, and that sometimes impacted his food because, they throw it on the ground. And so to know that he was taking care of his Shudi, that was such a beautiful scene. And again, contributes to his name, Goo, and having concern for, because he even disregarded his own well-being, like the freezing of his hands. That is something that's a serious issue, suffering from frostbite, hypothermia, and things like that, losing blood circulation in any part of your body for extended periods of time is dangerous, regardless of spiritual cores and yada, yada, blah, blah, blue, blue, blue. So it was nice to get insight on that in particular. I enjoyed the scene. It hurt, but I enjoyed the scene of Goo Mahng and Mosi eating at the restaurant, and Goo Mangh's experience with that, especially when he was like, the food, it's poisoned. and Mosi at first was like, it's not poison, but then he was like, oh my God, I'm just going to go with it. Drink this, and this will help with the poison. And then Goo Mahng was like, yeah, let's not come here anymore. It was so funny. So then, it's just, I personally feel like Mosi is a masochist, which I know that's not the case, but maybe it is the case, because he's continuously testing Goo Mahng and saying things and asking him questions to see if he's retained any of his memories, only to be disappointed. Like when they were at the restaurant and how all of those things played out. And it's like you keep holding on to this hope, holding and holding and holding, and you really just needed to let it go, my guy. Like, although in the end, I guess at the end of these chapters, we know he doesn't need to let it go, because the guy is going to get his memories back, even if they're only fragmented. Let's see. The next thing I want to talk about is I was so happy that we actually finally got a genuine happy expression coming from Mosi. He laughed when they were out together, and he was contemplating on telling Goo Mahng something, and then Goo Mahng was like, well, don't tell me, because you don't want to, but also if I'm supposed to remember in the future anyway, then don't tell me. I don't want to listen. Being so childish, and seeing that, Mosi actually laughed at that, because we haven't really seen any other emotion from him. Even in the flashbacks, he's so intense and everything. Even if it says he looked at Goo Mahng with endearment or something like that, he's just so intense and fiery. It was nice to see a softer side of him. Let's see. If I go to page 186, yes, when Goo Mahng was asking if he could have Mosi's name on his slave collar, or as it said in the book, on his plaque. And, Mosi told him no, and was basically going through that whole spiel of he hates him. First off, it was interesting that, like, Goo Mahng didn't even know what that word meant. And so he had to learn what it meant. But Goo Mangh's response was like, wow, because he said, but you look like you're in pain, like it really hurts. Hating me, it hurts you. And, it just kind of makes me think about experiences that we have when we are deeply hurt by someone. And for those of us who choose not to forgive, I'm not saying you got to forgive when something immediately happens. It could take, a month, a week, a year, several years, whatever. But the longer we hold on to pain and resentment and just negative feelings towards someone, it's really hurting ourselves the most. And it's one of those things where it's like, there is no time limit you can put on anything at all. But Mosi has been holding on to this for years. There were 7 years of Goo Mahng being gone, and then 2 years of him being back and in the capital, while he was still with the Northern Frontier, and then he came back. And it's been almost a year now, I think, or something like that, that Goo Mahng has been living with him. So 10 years of holding on. Now, don't get me wrong, this person is like in front of him every day, but he's holding on to this hatred and this hope. And all of it, honestly, is hurting him. So it's just crazy how Goo Mahng doesn't really have a lot of memories and much insight on anything. But there are some things that you just take note of. And it was so Again, just showing his concern and matching his name to his personality, because he's like, please don't hate me, then you'll stop hurting. And I can do whatever I need to do to make you stop hating me, So it's just like, whew. Then going to page 191, I'm trying to get through all of my notes, y'all, where Goo Mahng was excited about knowing he was talking about, the words that he was able to recognize now in the kitchen while he was cooking. I figured since it's been a while, I just tell you how to say all these words. They're on page 191, but salt is yen, so second tone, yen. And then rice is mi fahn. Technically, there are different ways to say rice, like cooked rice, but anyway, the typical way, mi, third tone, fahn, fourth tone, mi fahn, mi fahn. Then to say flour, I actually hadn't learned that before, but I just looked it up really quickly, and it's mian fun, which makes sense in my brain. So mian fun, mian fun. And then oil is yo. Vinegar is tsu. Think of cats and the TS at the end and just put u after it. Tsu. Then we have soy sauce, which is jiang yo, which, yes, this yo is the same yo as oil. Yo, it's sauce oil, so soy sauce. Anyway, the other thing I wanted to say is Morsi is way too repressed. He's been so irritable, of course, because Goo Mahng isn't remembering anything, but he's just holding all of this stuff in and not venting his frustrations in any kind of healthy way. And it's unfortunate because Goo Mahng is getting the brunt of this. Mind you, he's not suffering so badly. He's just thinking like, oh my gosh, my wolf companion is going to die at this rate because he's so angry. But he's too repressed. This guy needs to find an outlet somewhere that is healthy. Anyway, so now we have Jiang Fuli, who has finally come into the picture. I'm not going to do the tones right now. I guess we'll save that for the recap video. So I'll just tell you how to pronounce it in general. Jiang, Jiang Fuli. Jiang Fuli. Very simple. But anyway, he's this haughty miracle doctor who has a very, very bad temper. And we have him here saying the only way to get Goo Mangh's memory back is to let it happen naturally and fragmented, or to go find those two souls. And I have to agree with what he said, as far as it'd be better to retain all memories or to lose them all. Because I can only imagine, actually I know how it feels when I think about it, to have fragmented memories. It's really something difficult to deal with. Like growing up, I personally dissociated a lot. And as an adult, when I would reflect on things that happened to me, or when I used to have certain conversations with my mother and she would accuse me of doing this or saying that or something like that, and I'm trying to remember because she's swearing up and down I did these things, it's hard. It's really, really hard when you have memories and you're like, wait, am I remembering everything? Am I remembering correctly? Because like I said, a lot of times I dissociated, so I wasn't really there. And it was kind of like, okay, did I do these things and just kind of block it out of my brain, or is she completely making stuff up? So yes, I agree. It's better to just have all the memories or none of the freaking memories. And honestly, as much as it may hurt Morsi, I would rather him not have any of the freaking memories at all than have fragmented memories. Nevertheless, we know that he's going to get them, these fragmented memories. And maybe, hopefully, one day he will get all the memories. We just have to keep reading in order to find out. So, I think that's pretty much all I want to say about this. The only other thing that I want to talk about is this Chung Feng Jun's daughter, Lanar, who has this weird illness with her spiritual core that basically makes her go berserk and hurt people. Not in the same sense, but hearing about it, even though we didn't get a whole lot of detail, kind of reminded me of mental illnesses that we have nowadays. My bad. I don't mean mental illnesses. I mean mental disorders, or we can even say a neurological disorder. and how, depending on the severity of them, they affect people. I specifically relating it to like autism. I kind of remember watching what's the name of that song? The show, The Good Doctor, and seeing the moments when the main character would like just explode, and it was extreme. Not to say this is the exact same thing. Again, we have very little detail, but to me, I'm like wondering if Meat Bun was considering mental illnesses in a way and wanted to write them in a more unique style. And so put it with the spiritual core and how that is running rampant in the little girl and everything like that. Nevertheless, we will continue reading and see what happens with these memories, especially now that Goo Mahng has this medicine that he's taking that he really doesn't like. I also want to apologize because I feel like I laughed a lot in this recording and even in the last one, but y'all have to understand. I found book 2, the first time I read it, to be hilarious. Apparently that has not changed very much. I still find it extremely hilarious. So there is nothing to be done about that. I'm going to laugh. And when I feel like I'm laughing too long, I will stop the recording. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep those laughs in. And hopefully you laugh with me. But if not, then yeah. Okay. That is enough. My voice is tired. And so I bid you all good night or good morning. And wo ai ni men.